and support. So we do have a 10:30 meeting on the 19th, and so she's working on some communication around that, where not only will we be talking about special education, we'll also be talking about gifted education as well. The reason why that's a beautiful partnership is because in special education and in GT, we have students who are served in both departments. And so it's a nice way. It's really about how do you support learners regardless of where they fall. And so having one of the things that Casey is going to do is open up that at that venue opportunities for how frequent to have meetings and to be able to get some momentum going for parents to partner. That's a safe place for parents to have people that they can connect with who are also walking that, but also partnering with the district through that process.
And how often is this action team that exists in its current form? How often are they meeting? Is that an ongoing thing?
So we'll meet for the staff behind me. So we'll meet
I guess there's a list in our book of 20 people or so.
Yes. So we'll have quarterly check-ins on.
Quarterly.
Yes, sir. Even though the goals are written for annual progress, we felt like continuing to look at that, because the nice part is there's staff from all of the campuses, a great opportunity for them to even go back and celebrate with their campuses. Here's what's going well. Here's areas we're still massaging and working on.
Do you see opportunities for parents to be involved in that process in any way, or is that something separate from what you're doing there?
I don't know. It's something the action team can consider. If not, definitely through the SAGE, we do see that there's a great partnership. The part that's a little bit unique with special education is what I've shared before, is each student's plan and why we serve them is very individualized. So we can definitely talk about big picture areas and how do we support and training and components like that. But when there's very specific needs for a parent has for their student, that's probably a one-on-one conversation so we can support them.
That's the second question I had was, as we're evaluating where we can look at metrics, and I like the ideas around retention goals and the reading goals that are broad. I just keep challenging this committee to look for other areas. I know with the individualized education plans, it's very difficult to find, but as you can keep bringing things that we can measure,
sure,
I think it's important.
Absolutely. Well, data drives everything that we do, so that's not too foreign. But definitely, I do think there's opportunities that as we master the pieces that we discuss, there's always going to be new opportunities for us to consider and look at and get better.
Thank you.
Can I add one thing to the SAGE? So it's a PTO-driven program. Casey Havens is the council liaison for SAGE for PTO, and then each campus has a SAGE rep. So the goal is to partner SAGE through PTO with the district. And Casey, I think, heard about it from Wiley. I don't want to quote her, but there was another PTO. She's like, hey, why don't we have this? So that happened, I think, right before COVID. And then we had administrative changes. And so it's kind of a perfect storm as far as not getting them off the ground. But with their action that they're taking now and the desire to make it happen, I think hopefully that could be part of a way to get
I know
involved.
our SAGE PTO representative and I have already had meetings, and we've attended some professional development on a Sunday, which was awesome. And then we've sponsored the opening the Century Room at our Heart Nights for Science Night and Family Fun Night, I believe. So our SAGE rep reaches out all the time to me to see how we can coordinate that.
Any other questions? Comments? Thank you all very much. Item 11, consider an act on budget amendment number 3.
Good evening, board. So this evening, we do have a item on the agenda for budget amendment number 3. So before we dive into the budget workshop, I wanted to present that to you. You might remember we've had 2 budget amendments so far to date, so not a whole lot. But this budget amendment 3 represents 2 items. When we merged 499 and 199 fund codes at the last budget amendment so that we could combine the 2 separate programs that we had for early childhood into our general fund. We knew at that time that part of the revenue had been estimated in the budget and part of it had not. So we were kind of monitoring what was going on in the program so that we could come back to you. We went ahead and moved the expenditures into 199 and budget amendment 2, and now we're moving revenue. In addition to that, we're moving some, basically some contingency that was put into the student nutrition budget that if you'll remember back to budget amendment number 1, we moved student nutrition from 240 to 101 because in discussions with the regional service center, we weren't appropriately coding that to begin with. So in that move, we're also moving some of that contingency back to the general fund where it was supposed to be. So you'll see that that puts our revenue back up to where it was in the adopted budget.
Questions? If not, I would need a motion to approve the amendment. So moved. Chad Collins.
Second.
Second, Marvin Bobo. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. All right, item 12, budget workshop.
All right, so we have a number of items to go through. This is the beginning of our budget workshop process for the spring as we prepare the 2022-2023 budget. So these are the topics that we'll review in this first workshop. We'll discuss attendance and give a brief update on what we know relative to what the state is doing. We'll give a current year projection update. I believe the last one we gave was in December. We'll discuss some considerations for next year's budget and also provide an update on student nutrition. The last one we did was towards the beginning of the year, so I wanted to update you on that department's work as well. So again, we always talk about reframing our story as our theme for the budget development process this year as we continue the work in our focus areas of legacy of excellence, future ready students, and financial sustainability. This truly is what it's all about, is trying to reframe the story from a financial perspective that the district has had so that we can turn it to one of financial sustainability so that we can continue great discussions on some of the things that you've heard earlier this evening. This is the kind of milestone map that we developed at the beginning of the year relative to budget development. So you'll see we've done a lot of work from November through March, and this is when we had planned to begin our first budget workshop. You'll also see that we're going to continue those budget workshops through April and May until the budget does get adopted in June. So in regard to attendance, if you haven't been attending board meetings in the past, you may not realize that this is one of the most significant drivers of our financial formula and the revenue that the district receives. So this is always one of the first items that we want to look at when we're developing our budget. So we did share in prior board meetings that no hold harmless, as it was termed last year, is allowable per the legislature for 21 and 22. So initially we had reviewed what was put into the budget in terms of enrollment and attendance. And it was essentially for budget purposes, we had estimated a higher level of enrollment and at a 97% attendance rate as opposed to our historical average of 96%. So you can see from the slide that at that time, at the very beginning of the year, we had estimated about a $529,760 basic allotment loss dependent on state action due to the lower enrollment compared to the budget, as well as the lower attendance rate. So we've been anxiously kind of watching to see what happens at the state level. Initially, after the first 6 weeks of school, the state looked and noticed that most school districts had a lower attendance rate than they historically would have. And we are one of the states in the country where our funding formula is driven by that average daily attendance. So they put forth what they called a TPAR adjustment for the first 6 weeks. And the idea was that after the more of the year progressed, the state would look at either our last 18 weeks of attendance this year or the first weeks of COVID essentially and determine which of those was the lower rate, which for us would be the last 18 weeks of this year, most likely, and make an adjustment to our first 6 week attendance rate based on those results. essentially boosting our attendance rate for that first 6 weeks to reflect more of a non-COVID situation. You may recall that the first 18 weeks would have began about January. So if you recall what our attendance rates looked like in January across the state, as well as in Lovejoy ISD, that wasn't anything that was going to benefit anyone because of the Omicron variant. Attendance was very low again. So at that time, TEA said we will have to do something else. We've anxiously awaited news ever since. The House Public Education Committee members have sent a letter to TEA asking the commissioner to provide a hold harmless for the attendance rate for the school year that would fall in line with our 18-19 attendance rate. And that would certainly benefit Lovejoy ISD because right now at our current enrollment, we are averaging not only that lower enrollment, but a 94% average daily attendance rate. So our loss could be anywhere from $450,000 to $900,000 this year compared to budget. Unfortunately, I have no news to share for you on this item. We are still waiting for more information. And so I'll share with you some of the things that we've used to create this first projection. It's always difficult to do, of course, when there are a lot of unknowns, but we're going to continue to monitor these items and bring you any updates during our monthly budget workshops. So in our current year, I do want to make certain that I share that there are a number of initiatives that have been taken on or measures that district staff have taken to attempt to mitigate any of that potential loss. So the foremost would be the attendance communication. So if you've been annoyed as a parent by any of the communication from your principals regarding attendance, I apologize. But they are really doing a great job of trying to make sure that our students are not only in school for their benefit primarily, to further their learning, but also to help us with attendance and on the financial side of the house as well. So we appreciate everything that they are doing and that everybody else is trying to do to support that communication and encouragement. And we appreciate the community being able to support that as well. The second budget management measure that we've implemented this year is open position review. You'll see the effects of some of this here in a few more slides. But essentially, it's usually automatic for school districts when a certain position is vacated for whatever reason. That position is immediately posted, right? And that's not really what we've done this year. We've been very thoughtful as people have departed the district on whether or not that position needs to be reposted, whether or not we need to hire it now, whether or not we can perform those duties with other staff or redefine. Is it an opportunity to redefine the tasks that we do in a way that's more efficient? The third item is monthly revenue and expenditure reviews. We've been providing very lengthy reports to department and cabinet members so that they can review where their budget was set at the beginning of the year versus the current month as we move forward, so they're cognizant of those items. We've discussed the budget amendments previously. We've also been reviewing overtime expenditures. Soon we'll be implementing our end of year procedures and closing out the ability to create new POs about the middle of April. ESSER supplemental. You may have heard some districts received a lot of ESSER funds. That's not us. We received a small amount, an allotment of up to $2.2 million for the next 2 years. So we've been working hard to try to identify any items that we could submit for essentially reimbursement from the state through ESSER supplemental. I also want to thank Sancy for her work on the COVID grant fund. So we've been trying to really maximize any funds available from the state that we could to reclass previous expenditures. Special revenue and required spending allotments. So as a result of our audit, we initiated some changes so that we were monitoring those items monthly as opposed to waiting until the end of the year. And lastly, we've engaged a firm to do a property value study audit that could help us gain additional state revenue that we did not receive in prior years by providing any data that we can to support the fact that we believe we should have gotten more state aid. So again, that's just to kind of reiterate some of the items we've shared throughout the year that we've done. We're now going to go through some projection updates on the current year, assumptions that we built into the model as it is now, and a 5-year model.
Dr. Plus, can I pause on that? Back to the question on any potential hold harmless. Who ultimately makes that decision? Is it the commissioner? Is it legislatures? Is it or lators? Or
It would be TEA and the commissioner.
The commissioner is who, and our communication is just very limited. Is that the issue?
The communication on this item is very limited. The statement is that there's something, we're looking at that.
We're working on it.
We're working on it.
And Dr. Duplessis, remind me in terms of our budget timeline, I think the legislature or TA struggled with kind of how they were going to end up doing it last year too. I know you weren't here, but do you remember what time of the year they kind of decided what they were going to do about hold harmless or funding adjustments?
Definitely. I think we knew by this time that there was going to be a hold harmless. Yes, the difficulty I think this year is that the legislature passed certain items that precluded them from using that same measure this year. So they're having to redefine that. And so they do review every district's attendance data to try to derive a formula that would work. But other than that,
Okay.
I hope they hurry up.
I don't know, and I just know we're starting this budget process and we have to formalize a budget by June.
Yeah.
And it might be a
The
little
idea
later
that
than
we have
that
to
before
take
we know.
That might
these projections and assumptions are in flux.
correct. Absolutely. And so we'll present a couple different information points as we evaluate what that could do for Lovejoy ISD, if there is one, if there isn't one. So yes, definitely a challenge in the budgeting process. So this is just a graphical representation of the major milestones in this current year's budget. Items that we've adjusted for, increased or decreased. For those of you that are more detail oriented like myself, this is the one for me. We provided it in both formats, but essentially we've detailed each amendment that has been brought to the board and also where we are currently with our revised budget. We do create a projection for the remainder of the year. That's something that we kind of monitor ongoing every month as we see how our budget is performing to actuals. And so I did want to point out some of the items that we're already seeing as significant variances to the adopted budget. So you'll see the first item under projections that a net revenue decrease is projected for enrollment or ADA loss of $639,365. So essentially what that's saying is that that is the decrease in revenue that we're projecting currently for the remainder of the year based on no hold harmless. Property tax collections, we're projecting actual revenue under adopted budget by $719,894. That's been an interesting analysis. We did have tax compression. The board adopted the budget in June, and we do not get our final maximum compressed rate from the state until later. So that's always a little bit of a weird thing for June 30th fiscal year end. So as we looked at that, we knew that was an impact, but essentially what that would do is as compression occurs and our maximum compressed rate falls, as most of you have heard, state aid should increase at that same level. Obviously, because our enrollment and our ADA decreased, that wasn't made up in state aid as much as you might have hoped, but that's really represented in the first item, enrollment/ADA. So as we peeled back and pulled up spreadsheets that we could locate from when the budget was adopted, there was a VATRE enriched tax rate that was used in that calculation at 17 cents, which our tax rate has never been approved to be at. So essentially that's that $719,000 difference.
So it's an error.
I could only say that it would be done assuming a VATRE would have passed already or been discussed and planned for. So that's when I would have, if I were projecting the budget, would have put that into the spreadsheet.
What is the actual rate?
So right now we're at like 13 point and some change. So that was a little bit of a discovery. So when we see those two items, those are obviously fairly significant changes in our revenue projection compared to the adopted budget. Then we look at the tuition and fees. Obviously, we discussed that in the budget amendment. Again, just adjusting those to follow the new programming. Our winter storm Uri claims, we are to the positive $159,480 for the current year. Payroll is to the favorable of over $1.1 million this year. That is because of several reorganizations, hiring of folks at lower salaried positions, and also due to our vacancy rate, specifically in auxiliary services. So we're actually saving quite a bit on the payroll area, and that's essentially what is going to save our budget this year. ESSER expenses, we're projecting that we will be able to get $450,000 of that approved for this year, and we're continuing to do that work to submit additional items. It's quite a lengthy process, so we don't think we could recognize any more than that realistically this year, but we'll be recognizing more of it next year. On the non-payroll side, we're estimating or projecting a positive impact of $221,074. So obviously some efficiencies on the actual to projected budget are being realized in that area.
Jennifer, can you clarify on the ADA again? This 639 number, is that going off of the 94 we're tracking at?
Mhm.
So if we could do just a little bit better for this last 9 weeks, I guess you'll maybe tell us that in a minute.
It could definitely improve that. We, in order to do an annual projection, we're basically selecting an attendance rate for the year.
Okay, you do off the whole thing. Okay.
Yeah, so our attendance rate to date is average of 94% right now. So that's what we use.
Got it.
So I think that's
639 inclusive of the early childhood development centers numbers.
That would actually show up in your tuition and fees. Good
I think the
question.
639, a third of it is enrollment, because we're off on enrollment,
Mhm.
right? That's the 44, and then the other part's the 86, 88. Is that right?
Right, so
So it's really 400, about 400,000 is in enrollment. Or not
So it's
enrollment.
missing,
80
it's
to
seats that
88.
didn't get filled that we thought would be.
Correct.
Yeah, good point.
So that is a combination of those items, and the net effect of all of those items is that we're projecting that we will still be ahead to some degree at the end of this year. So I did kind of want to provide a picture of what I believe is representative of building this budget this year. We planted some seeds. We talked about a lot of things from November through February. November is when we presented the first budget projection for the current year, and we've continued to kind of plant some seeds. And so we've talked about things like staffing efficiency. We've talked about things like compensation, zero-based budgeting, the work of the Financial Sustainability Committee. Each of these items are kind of like a seed that we've planted along the way, and we've been really very fervently watering and working on these. And so you're just beginning in this month to start to see the fruit of that labor. But it's definitely not complete either. So we will continue to develop in each of these areas. So I just kind of wanted to explain what that process looks like if you haven't been involved with the development of the budget before. It will be a fully developed plant by the time we get to June. We're still growing some of those limbs and evaluating along the way. Thankfully, the board has helped us by setting some budget priorities, which help us focus our work. This is actually required by the state that the board set budget priorities. And so in quite a lengthy workshop earlier this year, we had a lot of discussion around the various things that were needed to bring Lovejoy ISD into financial sustainability and also to continue our legacy of excellence. And so the board identified these items. First, fund balance, so that we could plan to achieve 90 days of fund balance for minimal health and really 120 days for long-term cash flow because of our reliance on local tax collections. The second item was compensation, but that was also often referred to as 1B, that was extremely important to the board, but recognizing that we also have to have financial sustainability and able to provide continuing compensation. Attendance and enrollment, obviously being the major drivers of our revenue. So those were the budget priorities that were set, and the manner in which we were going to move forward with each of these items were through zero-based budgeting, staffing efficiency studies, the work of the Financial Sustainability Committee, and program reviews. So I'm going to begin to share a few items that we're starting to build our 22-23 projections on. The first is local tax collections. So this chart gives you a a picture of our property value growth year over year. Currently, I'm using a projection of 8% in our property value growth in our projection, and also including the impact of the increase in homestead exemption from 25 to 40,000 that's going to vote in May. I think most districts and folks are assuming that would probably pass, so it's probably our best bet to project based on that. You may have heard that there's about a 23.5% year over year property value growth in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, according to Texas A&M and the appraisal district, but also realizing that as primary homeowners, which most of our taxpayers are, you're capped at a 10% year over year growth. So I just kind of wanted to mention that. We won't get our preliminary tables from the appraisal district till the beginning of April. Once they send out their preliminary information on the 15th, they'll start providing us weekly updates. They are going to provide us some information on basically our local collections with or without that increase in homestead exemption and looking at that cap. So we will work closely with them on refining our projections as we move forward with that. And enrollment projections are obviously a huge part of generating our budget plans. So this is a picture of what the demographer provided to us earlier this year on our projected enrollment growth, the green line being low, the blue mid, and the red high. I don't think anybody ever touches the red line. And really since COVID, we kind of look between the green and the blue line for reality somewhere in there. So our current projection does use the midpoint between the low and moderate growth projections you see on this slide, as well as maintaining the current Lovejoy scholar numbers just to build this current projection. On the attendance side, if you'll see on the left, you'll see our attendance rate year over year. You see the significant drop off through March 17th of this year. We were at 94% compared to just kind of floating around in the 96% range in prior years. Interestingly enough, if you look at our absences, approximately 2/3 of those are not COVID related this year. So we felt like it was a fairly good estimate to use 96% if we assume that the difference between the 94 and the 96 and some change, 2/3 of that is really not COVID related, then we can fairly estimate that 96% is achievable. But again, that's an ongoing discussion that we'll have during the budgeting process. So other considerations that are under discussion that we've talked about at prior meetings and are in work are looking at staffing, whether that's through efficient standards, through instructional models, master schedules, looking at our sub-programs, also looking at program reviews, whether that's the Child Development Center or transportation. We have some unique programs in the district, so we just want to take a fresh look at any of those, ensure that the models we're using are reaping the anticipated revenue that was projected, and review any fees for non-curricular programs that may not be supporting those programs. Also looking at compensation, what our options are for any equity and market adjustments, looking at stipends, making sure that what we're doing there is appropriate, and then also applying different possibilities to future years to see what we can do. Zero-based budgeting, I'm proud to say that a lot of that work is done. So I think the principals looked quite well rested and department heads had a great spring break. So thank you for your work on that. We've also looked at our tax rate and any things that we might be able to do there. So these are just items that we've discussed throughout this year, especially in the last several months. But as it relates to the current projection that I'm going to share with you tonight, as it relates to staffing efficiency, we're using a current projection of about $1.4 million in efficiencies for 22-23 and continuing at that level. There's been a great deal of work that's been done around analyzing efficient instructional models and what can be done in that way. So we feel like at this point, that's a pretty fair estimate of the work they've already identified that would be potential without implementing any significant changes to existing staff that would result in any kind of RIF at this point. So that's what's built in so far. On the compensation considerations, we have included a two-step value increase, which sounds kind of confusing, but we know our current staff, our returning teachers this year receive their step increase as a supplemental pay. And so when I say two-step value increase, that essentially means they would be moving 2 steps, as would new teachers to redefine what those steps are. And then all non-teaching staff would get a 1% increase. So building this into this projection was a total of $441,000. And so as we look at outer years of our projection model, we've included that same one step, 1% idea in future years as well. So on the zero-based budgeting versus traditional budgeting, we had savings of over $300,000 that we were able to implement into our 22-23 projection based on the work that was done in that area.
Where
Can I-
did the majority of that come from?
That's,
Is there a couple of bullet points you can share?
that's a great question. I will share rhetorically that I, as a budget owner myself, when I looked at my budget, it was definitely something that I could define what I felt I was leading for in my department and really focus on those items, make sure they were covered, and then maybe be creative about some of the other items. So I'll invite some of y'all to share if you want to share the things that you've done in my area. One of the things that we looked at was being efficient with our utilities and contracted services. And then I also looked at our travel budget and can we be more creative with some of the trainings and PD that we do. And so those were some of the items that we looked at. I don't know if anybody else wants to share what. Yeah. They were all
So-
trying to get gold stars.
So was it, I guess my question is, was there one thing that stood out or was it everybody figured out ways to save? Is that a better way to say it?
A lot of the savings came from just reevaluating things such as technology subscriptions. Because of technology subscriptions that we didn't utilize to the extent they were meant to be, so there's no subscriptions. There's not cheap software.
Well, I'll just stop to say thank you for going through the process. I know it was a lot of work and that's real money that's been saved, so I appreciate it.
The other thing you might mention is the cultural mindset change around the idea that folks felt like they were told they had to spend the money or they would lose it, or it would not be available to them in the future, which was problematic for me from a business perspective, but you might elaborate on that.
Sure.
I think that was significant.
Right, I think, and we actually had this conversation again this morning. We have a cabinet meeting every Monday morning and our incredible principals join us for that. And we were talking about current year and the importance of continuing to save. You can see what kind of ground we've made up by on a daily basis trying to make innovative and efficient choices because we knew we had a hole that we needed to work our way out of from that initial budget where that was set. And we talked about the importance that if there is something that is needed for students or for teachers for the school year, then, and that money is in their budget, then they need to spend that money where it's needed. However, if there's a more efficient way to do it, if it's something that is not a need, if they would please make sure that they exercise that savings because everything we don't use this year rolls forward and assists with 22-23.
Given this is the smallest impact area of our budget, or one of the smaller impact areas of our budget, trimming about 300,000 is appreciated, certainly.
Thank you. They did amazing work. Actually, to be honest, I've been in situations before where you've had to cut budgets and you're squeezing for 3 or 4%, and these people stepped up with kind of outpriding each other by, but really, I think a lot of it too was involvement. They're really being involved and having the opportunity to review your own budget with someone and talk through what can I do or what are some creative ways that we can do things differently. I think a lot of people had a lot of really good ideas. So thank you for recognizing their work. So, to be honest, when we do zero-based budgeting, we always get nervous because the dollar amount's always going to be smaller than the staffing side of the house because that's where we spend the large majority of our funding. But we know that we would all far rather be more efficient in those other areas. So all that work is kind of all the assumptions that I just shared with you are baked into this 5-year baseline projection for our general fund. So I know we just moved 240 to 101. This doesn't include student nutrition. So just wanted to clarify that. So I know this might be a little bit small for some of y'all, but you'll see the prior year budget and then you'll see our current year budget, fiscal year 22. And if you look at the net, we're estimating a net surplus of $495,535 in the current year. What that does is it increases our fund balance from roughly 8.6 to 9.1 million. So we ended the year last year with 74 days of fund balance. So we all had a little bit of panic attacks in November as we were waiting for tax collections to come in to ensure that we were financially fit to make payroll. By performing what we did in the current year, it would get us to 81 days of fund balance. So again, that's our current projection, but definitely looking like it's giving us some headway in the work that we wanted to do. And the calculation at the bottom, it does give you the amounts that we would need to get to 90 days of fund balance from the 81 would be $969,880 would need to be gained to start next year at 90 days. And so you'll see that kind of continuing on from that projection. And so while I was pleased to see that we're making headway, we still have quite a ways to go. And if you look at the projection through fiscal year 25 at the end, the unfortunate part is that we're doing good for a year or two, but if we were to continue in what we're doing now without finding other ways to add to our fund balance, by fiscal year 25, we would be at 67 days of fund balance. And at that stage, we would definitely be looking at some type of loan to make payroll. So we are making headway, but we still have a way to go. So we did look at some additional projections and items. So I'll pause if there's any questions on this one.
You might expand and educate on cash flows
Yeah, I was just, yes.
and tax receipts, because we're unique in how we're funded in that way. And I think it's something that's important for folks to understand, especially going into our next discussion around of those dollars.
Absolutely. Thank you for pointing that out. So we are unique in that the large majority of our tier 1 or FSP funding that we get is based on local tax collections. So every district has a mix of that funding and how much of it comes from local collections versus how much of it comes from the state. This is the first district I've been in that gets the high, gets such a high amount from local collections. And so it kind of creates an interesting anomaly. So if you are highly reliant on your local collections, if you think about when you pay your tax bill, probably very few of you pay it in September, October, or November. You're probably paying it in January. So what that means for us is because we're not getting large state aid payments, when we begin the year in August and we start instructing students, we have to float through that point where we're starting to get our maximum amount of collections in the December, January timeframe. So November through January are kind of really important because that's when we start to see that local collection in. So because of that reliance, it's really important for us to have financial health to be able to bridge that time from the beginning of school until about late November, early December when we start seeing significant tax collections coming in. Thank you. Anything else? Okay. So we get several questions on different items. Like one of the items we've already discussed tonight is whether or not there would be something like a hold harmless. And what happens if we have a lower percent of ADA? Is there anything we can do from a tax rate perspective? So we wanted to look at all these items and just kind of give what if scenarios. So the first one is the hold harmless. So if you look at the current fiscal year 21-22, you'll see the figure there of what we would get if a hold harmless was approved by TEA and the commissioner at the level that the letter submitted to them indicated using that 1819 ADA, and that would be $570,427. So obviously that would go and help benefit us from the standpoint of the $900,000 roughly needed to get to 90 days of fund balance. It would reduce that to just under $400,000. We would then at that point only need $399,453 to start next year with 90 days of fund balance. So obviously that would help us. In addition to that, if we look at reducing our ADA by 1%, according to the projected enrollment for 2022-23, that figure is $274,321. So that would be the reduction in revenue compared to our projection that we would receive if we had a 95% attendance rate as opposed to 96. So again, as we kind of consider each of these items in developing our budget, we want to know what those implications would be. The last item being a VATRE, we do have an option as a local community to pass a voter approved tax rate election to increase our enrichment pennies on our M&O tax rate by 3.17 cents. If we were to enact that, or if the community considered that in a November election, that would increase revenue by $760,829 in next fiscal year.
Jennifer? Jennifer, down here.
Yes,
Could you
sorry.
explain again what entitlement pennies are?
Yes. So we have our M&O tax rate is based on the maximum compressed rate that the state sets for us. We no longer get to set that. And then we have two types of what are called enrichment pennies or tier 2 pennies. We have golden pennies and copper pennies. The golden pennies are not subject to recapture. So most districts who are subject to recapture have maximized those golden pennies. House Bill 3 allowed us to go for some additional copper pennies. So the copper penny yield, the amount we get for those extra copper pennies was actually increased in House Bill 3. So it's kind of even better for districts now to get their copper pennies than it would have been prior to House Bill 3. So this opportunity presented itself in 2019 for Lovejoy ISD. And has not been exercised to date. So you've probably seen in the local community a lot of consideration of VATREs since 2019. So that would just be an option for the district to consider.
So go back for a minute, history-wise, to tax compression. The amount that the voters approved and said, we're willing to fund our schools at this level. You remember that rate?
Oh, our maximum compressed rate
No, prior to compression.
prior to compression, $1.17 or
And it was compressed to,
yeah, it was under $1. I would need to go back and pull that information for you.
and one of the things that did was hamper our cash flows because we're funded off tax receipts.
Yeah, and the tier 1 compression that we received is actually netted by state aid.
At the end,
Right.
but not during the times when we
That's
need
true.
it.
Right. And so interesting, a lot of, you may hear a lot about recapture in Lovejoy, and actually the amount that we pay in recapture isn't that large. So that's why it's usually in the couple $100,000 range. So that's why you'll see the VATRE is still beneficial from a revenue perspective. And so you'll see the projections for fiscal year 23, again, just looking at those increases and pluses and minuses. If our attendance rate fell to 95%, we got the hold harmless and a VATRE was passed, we would still end fiscal year 23 with 95 days of fund balance. And if you follow that through, we would still have 84 days of fund balance by fiscal year 25. So that's just kind of showing the net impact of all those different things. I also have one more.
It's confusing to me that our attendance goes up from 24 to 25, and yet we start going very much negative. Is that just the cumulative impacts of continuing the 1% increases?
Yes,
Is
precisely.
okay.
It's the 1% compensation increase without having any
And the steps.
requisite ADA increase. So while our ADA is stable or even decreasing in specific years, by baking in the 1-step and 1% increase into that projection, they're kind of conversely related.
We got to keep growing if we can keep funding that.
That's correct.
So this is assuming that the legislature does not change the basic
The funding
allotment
formula.
and tier 1 and tier 2 revenue numbers coming back.
This does not include an increase in the basic allotment. That's correct. And if an increase to the basic allotment were passed, although as much ESSER funding, there's conversations on both sides with that, whether it's been, under conversation and pressure by school districts that it's been needed for years, but with the influx of federal funds from ESSER for other districts, that conversation is just not as loud as it once was. But definitely something that would have an impact.
There's also a big jump from 24 to 25 in the recapture number.
Yes.
Can you explain that a little bit?
I can. So I kind of had this highlighted on another slide that's an issue we want to monitor, because what's happening is our property values are increasing. So while our property values are increasing, and I use that 8% figure for each year, our enrollments decreasing, ADA's decreasing. So that increases the amount of recapture that we have to send back to the state because we're getting more and more collections and having fewer and fewer students. So they will recapture more of that funding. Good point. So on this projection, I just played with, put it back at 96% ADA. I'm just really, really hoping. But again, this is just another projection to show what it would look like with a hold harmless type provision, 96% ADA and a VATRE. At that point, even in fiscal year 25, we would still be able to maintain 91 days of fund balance and provide the 1% and one-step increase.
I'm not sure if we've ever talked about what other districts' average daily attendance percentage is. What's to be expected?
So we did, I think back in November when we looked at some of the benchmarking information, we shared some of the data with other districts, and with the local peers that we identified, essentially we were in the middle. So there was definitely, hypothetically room to be gained compared with our peers.
The peers were geographic neighbors?
Yes. Mhm.
And it comes down to what they build the budget on.
Yeah.
So
Mhm.
they could be 80, but if they build a budget on 80.
Looks good.
Could be, yeah.
But that's the gap is what we've got to,
It's a big gap.
It is.
94 to 96 is 400K.
So again, we will continue to refine these projections as we get more information. When our phone rings tomorrow because a decision has been made by the commissioner, we will adjust accordingly and bring you any of those
I like
updates.
that.
But I did want to just hit some highlights, and you've already mentioned a couple of them, but the efficiencies we've already implemented in the current year that you kind of see reflected in that lower staffing expenditure for this year of over $1.1 million. In addition to things like the 1.4 in staffing efficiencies and the 300,000 in zero-based budgeting, headway that we're making, we're looking at a total of about $2.8 million in efficiencies that we've already implemented or projected to do so in 22-23. But again, recognizing that it would take that additional 969,880 to get to the 90 days. It would take 2.6 million to get us to 90 days starting next year and through 2025. So if you wanted to provide that stability through that 5-year model that we showed, it would take the 2.6 and at $6.2 million for 120 days. So again, this projection does not assume any increases to the budget other than the compensation increase I mentioned. It does assume that 96% attendance rate, the last one we showed does. So you're looking at that $285,000 swing for 1% decrease in attendance rate. These projections are based on the current Lovejoy Scholar model. The property values increasing, you beat me to it, Mr. James. Because of the property values increasing and enrollment decreasing, we are monitoring that recapture. And so that's essentially part of the reason we do some of those long-term projections to make sure we're not missing any nuance that could occur based on those formulas. So as we continue to look at budget considerations for next year, I've just listed some items on here. These are all under development or waiting for more information. But the items currently being evaluated are, again, if a hold harmless type determination would be made. We're going to talk about the proposed Lovejoy Scholar Program in a little bit and different options that are available with that. And so I just put an estimate here of one of the options that could be utilized. The attendance rate at 96% is one of the assumptions that we've used. There is ongoing program model and staffing review being conducted. So that $1.4 million could possibly increase. There's also a review of the contract days, stipends, kind of those special items under review for any efficiencies that could be made. A view of scheduling models, looking at all types of fees, whether it's transportation, child development center, any of those items that may not be supporting the program completely. The VATRE amount we've talked about. If an athletic or fine arts extracurricular fee were utilized, then the $668,000 increase in revenue could be a possibility. And then lastly, we got the question of what would it be if we increase the district's contribution to the health insurance plan by a certain amount a month, and that net would be a $90,000 cost per year. So again, these are just items that are continuing and evolving discussion.
Can we, at some future workshop, dig into a little bit further the Child Development Center budget? I saw tuition was off by a couple $100,000. I don't know if that's strictly Child Development Center, but I'd be interested to know more details.
They are actually evaluating that right now. So we've had a couple of meetings, and they're still, still evaluating what that structure looks like since it was a new program.
Jennifer, I just wanted to clarify, because there was a comment earlier about one program having to shoulder all of this. So when we talked in previous months about gifted and talented, and I think SPED, and it was kind of reworking the model, does that go under the 1.3 staffing efficiency?
That's a good question. So the 1.4 million in
I
staffing
just want to point
efficiency.
out that it's not going to be shouldered by any one thing. It's like everyone's feeling it.
Mhm.
So if you can speak to that.
So I don't know, the gifted and talent, it's in there.
Part of that, yes.
Which is
Okay.
extremely detailed plan, which makes me happy. So thank you for that work. But yes, that's included
Okay.
in the 1.4.
That's what I thought, but I just want to make
Mhm.
sure.
Thank you. And they've really gone through a great deal of work to identify, to ensure that any number that we bring you, we have fully vetted and identified exactly the pathway. Because the last thing we want to do is provide a projection that's not achievable.
So on the ESSER funds, I pulled slides from prior board meetings prior to your time.
Oh.
Which reflected us capturing around 1.2 million this year from ESSER of that 2.2 that's available to us over the course of 2 years. So my question is there any stone unturned on redemptions or recoding or claiming expenses against this potential ESSER funding?
That's an excellent question. And I had a recent conversation as of this week, actually, with somebody at the state level to discuss what we could recode. And I think there are definitely opportunities. One of the things that happened that actually made it a little bit harder was the COVID grant that we got. So a lot of the items that we had identified and we were holding over here that we were going to submit, we could now submit in this bucket. And we got another year to go after our ESSER supplemental. So some of that was about
Maybe a delayed timing potentially.
What now?
Maybe a delayed timing because
Yes.
we received extra funds.
Yes, so we got a couple $100,000 over here in that COVID grant fund that we now weren't claiming on the ESSER side.
Right.
And so as time has elapsed, the state has loosened up on some of what may or may not be required to submit with ESSER reimbursements. So I feel like we're going to get much closer. It's just going to be a little bit longer to do that.
That helps. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Good question. So I wanted to shift slightly. Let me know if you have any other questions, but I wanted to shift to a quick student nutrition update. You might ask, why do we want to talk about student nutrition? Personally, it's because I think it's amazing. But anyway, and I'm not just saying that because Matt's here. But really, it does have a huge impact on our budget because if you recall, last year, we sent some money from the general fund to student nutrition because of the decrease in participation. So all districts across the state had such lower participation in the student nutrition program that many districts had to transfer money from the general fund to cover that loss. So I wanted to take a look at this and see how we're performing this year so we know what to expect and if it would have an impact and plan appropriately for next year. So in terms of a staffing update, I know we shared some information earlier this year, but we shifted team members to the two elementary schools really because we had so many more students participating in the food service program because it was under the seamless summer option and it is free of charge to those students at the elementary and intermediate level. So if you have not tried it, we encourage you to do so. We have seen some significantly increased meal participation. We shifted work schedules to accommodate those food production needs where we used to have a lot more production at the high school. We've kind of moved those around. We did have to reduce the number of daily menu entrees offered at some of the higher grade levels simply because we can't staff fully compared to what we would like to or what we have in the past. So there are some adjustments that you'll see that we've had to make to continue operation with the lower staffing levels that we've had this year. But I have to say hats off to this group because they have shifted, they have moved, they have done different things just to make sure that they could continue to serve meals to those students. So super proud of them. And I want to mention the incentive program that was approved by the board in December because that student nutrition fund stands on its own. And because the vacancy rate was about 30%, we really wanted to incentivize attendance for the student nutrition department, partially to recognize their work, but partially to encourage also that continued attendance because it was so important as we had that high vacancy level to be able to perform our work safely. So that was structured with 2 payout periods. And I have to say that, interestingly enough, our vacancy rate is now at 35%. But we are looking at a situation where all our hourly employees are meeting our attendance rate for the first payout. So that's pretty phenomenal. They're definitely showing up and taking care of business. So that cost is estimated at the $21,600 that we presented earlier. The retention incentive program has significantly reduced absences. So even if you have eyes that are a little bit difficult to see for me, sometimes I can tell what's happening on that last bar chart from here. We had in 2022 for the month of February, we had quite a significant decrease in PTO days from 26 last year to 7 this year with roughly the same number of staff members. So it's definitely having its intended impact. From a revenue and cost trend perspective, this shows you our expense as a percent of revenue through January 31st year to date. We're at 81%. And again, that's just a kind of a thing that we look to see how we're performing. And so that expense ratio being lower shows that we're doing pretty well for a couple of reasons. So we've had that significant increase in revenue that you saw because of that federal reimbursement for elementaries and intermediates. And inherently the staffing challenges have led to lower costs on the staffing side. And so that's kind of what you see going on in this chart. That revenue bar at the end, the blue one, there's a lot of kids eating, so that makes me happy. So what this means as a whole is 2022 is the first time that Lovejoy participated in that waiver program. And so you can see the difference in revenue that has generated. We're compared to school year 21, where our revenue was $426,143. We're at 1.1. So we've definitely made the COVID recovery and then some. The expenses year to date are shown here. So again, we're seeing a little bit decrease in expenditures as we've streamlined some of those menu offerings.
Is that waiver program been around for a while? What's the background on that?
It
You said
has.
It's the first time we've ever done it. I'm just curious.
Seamless summer option.
Okay. Got it.
Because of our what?
Free and reduced.
Low rate.
Socioeconomic.
Got it. Okay, because I felt like probably you would have said, hey, let's do this, but we just weren't eligible. Okay. Thank
I
you.
forgot about the one school. Almost every other district found the one school.
Yeah.
But we didn't have that option. So we have not heard anything about whether that waiver for the SSO would continue or not in next year. But as it relates to completing out this year, if you look at the last portion there for school year 2022, we're estimating a net profit of $145,711 for the remainder of this year. So definitely quite the comeback. So really glad for the work that they've been doing and glad that we won't be transferring funds from the general fund.
We moved what? How much did we move last year? 500,000 roughly?
380.
I think it was closer to 300,000.
Okay, I couldn't remember.
Yeah.
379.
185.
Because we had a balance before,
Yeah.
right?
Oh, right. You depleted the.
So this 145, we don't transfer back. We just start building a balance again within nutrition.
That's correct. And so that may help us looking forward to 22, 23. I thought it was a really neat mark hit this year. The first time in Lovejoy ISD, the 70% meal participation mark was hit, and that was at Puster Elementary School in February. So definitely seeing a lot more on that side of the house. And then, so you'll see some of the impact there. Birthday treats are back, birthday treat boxes. So if you haven't used those, they're available. So we do know that those are things that have helped make the comeback this year. But again, looking at the waivers for next year, it's not out there yet. They're definitely, lobbyists kind of asking for this to be continued. But at this point, we don't know. So we are budgeting for next year for the SSO not to continue, just so that we are set up for that. And in that case, we'll need to focus more on kind of regenerating some of the revenue opportunities at the secondary level. But any questions about the student nutrition side of the budgeting process? So as we build kind of towards the 22-23 budget, there will be another budget workshop at the regular board meeting in April and May as we look at June budget adoption. So just highlighted some of those items coming forward to you in the next couple months. May 9th, the Financial Sustainability Committee will share their findings with the board as well. So just kind of wanted to give you a framework for what would be upcoming. Any additional questions?
Any other questions, guys?
And what's the timeline around you bringing a recommendation to us on the VATRE?
That's a good question. So we would need to determine if we were going to build that into the budget before adoption in June. And then we would use that to estimate our tax rate as part of that process as well. We actually wouldn't have to call for that election until August for the November election date.
So in the next couple of meetings, we should have more formalized recommendations around that.
I assume so, but that may also be something that the Financial Sustainability Committee will discuss.
Right. And it'll be part of the financial sustainability discussion, as will all of our revenue options. Ultimately, it is a function of the Board of Trustees to determine whether a VATRE is something that the district will move forward with.
Thank you for the update. Many more to come.
Yes, thank you.
And thanks for the work going on behind the scenes by all those involved.
Thank you.
All right. Item 13, Lovejoy Scholars and Tuition Program.
Yes, we, Dr. DePlessis, we were trying to win at HR department for saving the most money, which was 20% of our staff, 20% of our budget. But I think one school back there beat us by just a percentage point, like 1 or 2, if I recall. I think Courtney from Sloan beat us just a little bit. So anyway. First of all, of course, I'm here to talk about our Lovejoy Scholar programs and tuition. And as the HR executive director, a lot of times we don't get to hear from parents, but many of our Lovejoy Scholar parents reached out and shared some of their wonderful experiences they've had in Lovejoy. And that's given me an opportunity to learn more about the program. And in the past 2 months I've been here, so I appreciate that. Got to talk with a lot of them and also send emails and that type of thing. So I appreciate that. Or sometimes from the HR department, when you do hear from one, it's not always the positive side of it. So I appreciate that. As we get into that, as we have refined our process and we have looked at our Lovejoy Scholars Program, we really wanted to look at and give you as much information as possible so you can make an informed decision. And we realized that in that program, there are actually just 3 different types of scholars. One are parents and community members, parents that are buying homes in the area, parents that are building homes or families that are, and also our traditional, specifically tuition-based students. One thing that I learned as we were really digging into all the information is this program allows for early onboarding of students because many of our families, they can start the school year here and it provides a stable opportunity for their kids to finish the year. So that was, I thought, very important to reach out, that the stability there. As we go on and look at the program, you can see this past year, we had 348 scholars accepted from the spring until we ceased applications in December. The program is pretty dynamic. It's not static. So when we closed the application process back on December 13th, we then looked at how many were there the first day of enrollment of the second semester. And there were 301 scholars January 5th. So when we came back, so in that time, we had some movement. So there, and we're going to talk about that a little bit more. Then once again, in March, we pulled to see how much movement, and there were 279 scholars. And then I pulled it just 3 days later, the same report, and we see 3 more students basically had submitted a residential, a proof of residency form that they have now moved into the district. So this, as I said, this program is not static. It is truly early onboarding for our students there. In looking at the program, so we had 348 scholars accepted, 62 are now residents, or we just had a few, I think maybe 2 that were employee children, 7 students withdrew, and then of course we have 21 senior graduates. That 62 is about 18% of our entire, of all scholars that were accepted. However, I really feel like that number is a little bit higher. We still know, looking at our application process, there are still some families that have not closed on their homes, or their home, they're still in the process of building homes there. Okay, so currently we would enter next year with around 258 scholars for next year.
Anna, real quick, the 21 senior graduates, is that ones that will graduate in May, or is that
Yes,
early?
that will graduate in
Okay,
May.
perfect.
Okay, so
Thank
that
you.
leaves us about 258.
Got it. Yep, that's what I was
Does that make
guessing. But I
sense?
know a few people graduated in December, so I want to make
Yes,
sure.
yes. Now those were, and of course we had, as I said, 7 withdrew, and then we have, I think there's going to be a total of about 20 more that are moving into the district as far as residents and closing on homes, or after those
From the
are building.
258.
From the 258. Yes, sir. Yes. And I'm going to ask Dr. Duplessis to come back and talk a little bit about our enrollment projections. I know she visited on this earlier. It's her favorite subject.
All right, so we discussed this briefly earlier. So as we look at our enrollment projection, this shows you the resident students only and the compound growth that we discussed earlier. This shows you that same chart that I shared earlier, including the 300 students, just based on the current program. This you may have seen before. We've shared, it shows what the program would look like, or what our enrollment would look like at 150 versus 300 scholars, and what that demographic projection would be for total enrollment. So all of these items were things that we looked at when the demographer came in and did an assessment. We did a lot of deep diving into any type of transfer, because that really can make or break our enrollment projections, and it's very nuanced in Lovejoy. So if we missed any intricacies in there, we could really miss that enrollment figure. One of the items we also looked at was the capacity of our current campuses. So while we can look at enrollment, if we don't have the space to house those students, it would be problematic. So we had PBK come in and do a capacity assessment of all our facilities. We looked at all the space that was there. We visited with campus principals. We looked at scheduling and who was in what classroom. And so essentially what you're seeing now is a comparison with the projection with 300 transfers in, just as an estimate for the next 10 years versus the functional capacity at an optimal level for each of those campuses. So if you're looking at this generally, the areas your eyes immediately drawn to, if you're used to looking at charts like this, is the red. Is there any red? Is there a space where we may potentially have an enrollment situation that reaches capacity or exceeds it at a school? So for the next 10 years, this shows you Hart, Puster, and Sloan, we would not reach 100% at any of those campuses, except for potentially Puster right at 100% 10 years from now. So what this tells us is that according to the demographic projections we received and the capacity analysis of the facilities, we do have space. So that's an important factor of consideration. Obviously, at the middle school and high school level, we don't have as much concern over space. We have quite a bit of space in those facilities. So what we did is have built a model here just to look at any and all options that we could lay out in kind of a format that might be something that could be followed and analyzed. So this particular chart is looking only at returning Lovejoy scholars for the 22-23 school year. And so the option across the left side is various rates, if those rates were utilized with returning scholars, and across the top, the 50 through the 85% are if you were to estimate the retention of our current Lovejoy scholars into next year based on any of those fee structures. So we want to look not only at the difference that would give us in terms of tuition, but also the difference in what we're calling here is state funding, which is really your FSP and ASF allotments. So to give you an example, I just picked a bar and I grade the $400,000 or $4,000 rate. And for example, if we use the 75% retention rate at that fee, you would see that the revenue from tuition will be $774,000. Then if you follow down to the retained funding at 96% attendance, that's 1.3 million. And so our total funding for returners at the current state funding level is listed below that. And so if you follow the formula all the way down, you'll see that our potential gain from the current year, if we were to implement that fee structure as 75% retention rate, would be $328,176. So hypothetically, you could pivot in any direction around this chart to add up those factors, but wanted to at least follow through one full calculation so you can see what the net would be. So you can see if we looked at the 50% retention rate at $4,000, we would actually have a loss this year of $375,648. And of course, on the 85% retention rate, it could be far greater at $609,706. And of course, to varying revenue structures based on tuition as well. So we also have generated a model for transfer fees for new scholars, and that's what you'll see in the next slide. So this again is applying different fee structures and different retention rates or enrollment rates based on a new scholar coming in the fall. So using those rates, what we're calling the likely scenario there is using basically the annual growth rate that we've experienced in the Lovejoy Scholar Program prior to this year. If we were to replicate that next year, we think the number would be 17 new scholars. If we think we can get 10%, then it would be 28, and so on and so forth. So based on the number of new scholars that could be brought into the district at the various levels, if we use that likely scenario based on the prior growth rate of the program at a $9,000 scholar cost, that would generate $153,000 in revenue. The ASF funding or FSP funding at $117,504 for a total revenue increase of $270,504. So again, these models kind of show you different ways to calculate those items and the net impact of each of those. We've also been asked to provide some information on the cost per student. So oftentimes we kind of look at this from a lot of different lenses. So this shows you from 2017 to fiscal year 2021, the historical cost that we have had per enrolled student and the cost basis for that. So this includes everything from general fund, student nutrition, special revenue, debt, and bonds. So this is kind of your all-in figure. And you can see the breakdown of those costs. On the next slide, you can see the same breakdown of costs, but on a per ADA basis, as opposed to a per enrolled student basis. So obviously less per ADA than enrolled student. So for fiscal year 2020-2021, our total cost per student per ADA was $14,192. So oftentimes we get asked about what is the allowable amount of tuition that the district can charge. If you look at the last year, you look at your total cost per ADA, which is what the code requires you to evaluate, that's $14,192, less the amount of state aid that you receive per ADA. And because of what we talked about earlier this evening, a lot of our proceeds are from local tax collections. So our actual amount of ASF or FSP state aid that we received per ADA in 2021 was $1,407. So if you net that out, the district could charge up to $12,785 in tuition. So we're well within the allowable tuition rate for students per ADA. Oh, sure, if there was anything else. Any questions about?
So our debt service on our bonds that we've issued to maintain our facilities and to obviously pay for the ones we have is approximately what per year? And what impact does a Lovejoy Scholar have on that debt service?
So our cost, if you use our cost per ADA for bonds and debt, you're looking at 453 plus 2558 last year. So roughly 3,000 per ADA.
3,000 per kid?
Mhm.
And does a Lovejoy Scholar benefit us in that regard?
So this is looking at cost. So this is really what we're spending out. So if we're not levying any tax, any INS from a scholar, then no, we wouldn't
Right.
have funds from that
Good.
for bond and debt.
Talk about cash flows a little bit. So we have 258 scholars currently, roughly. So we have cash flows that are funded through tax receipts. The other concern is that we have a constraint that we take upon us when we add 258 kids to the equation and the staff to support it as we make payroll. We're funding off of tax receipts. Those tax receipts don't change. They certainly true up at the end of the year, but that also puts a constraint on us from a cash flow perspective, being able to pay the bills, correct?
So we do get small state aid payments throughout the year, but yes, with the large majority of our proceeds coming from tax collections, that's more float from August.
In the formula for the scenarios, you have it at 258 students, correct?
That's correct.
But you also said we could potentially be looking at 238 because there could be 20 building and just haven't closed yet.
Correct.
Okay, so I just want to kind of think,
Yes, correct.
think through that. Okay.
Chad, remind me what the tuition was before, 9,000 and 11,000. We broke it down. Was it 9 and 11?
Correct.
9 for the elementary.
At one
and
point, it
11.
was even a little higher, wasn't it?
No, I think we were lower and then raised it, right?
We lowered and raised, is that what we did?
So it was 9 primary and 11 secondary or 11 high school?
Secondary, I believe.
I believe it was 9 and 11 year before last.
9 K through 6.
Correct.
And then 11, 7 through 12.
That's how it's identified.
I think it was 7
Secondary.
and 9 before that. Do we have any, I got one question around this. Is there any communication? I feel like I'm asking the same question I did before, because I'm asking about communication from legislature and TEA around this topic at all from the state perspective that we should be taking into consideration as we talk through this?
That's a good question because it did come up last spring that the legislature entertained the notion of disallowing tuition. But that conversation lasted about 60 days, I think, and it kind of died faster than the fund balance limit conversation died. we haven't heard anything about that since then. It hasn't been a topic of discussion. So I guess that's all I could say about that item. Is I don't hear
And Dr.
any-
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt too soon. And the legislature won't be in session again until 2023. Because they just were in 2021. So we're in the first year of a 2-year.
So you're good for 2 years.
They'll be in session in the spring or summer of 23. Right. After the 22-23 school year.
So 1 year.
So we are recommending consideration and action on adoption of a Lovejoy Scholar tuition rate for the 22-23 school year for returning scholars and a tuition rate for our new Lovejoy Scholars.
Before we step into that issue, since this presentation, there was something in the presentation about it at the workshop, but there's not one in this because we're basically deciding tuition and what that looks like. But just refresh everyone's recollection about how we're going to apply the program first for returning students.
Correct.
And run those applications or that process through. Then we'll see how many are coming back
Yes.
before we open it up to new scholars.
You're
Is that
exactly
correct?
right. We hope to open it up Monday to returning, Friday, April 1st to returning students. And we can definitely streamline that process to get them through quickly and hopefully so that they know what they're just, so they can make a decision fairly quickly. And then we would place those students and look at the, of course, the availability for future students as soon as those have all, as soon as we place those that have
So
wanted to be.
essentially, we're giving returning scholars preference.
Yes, correct.
And, they don't have to go through the
They're not going to have,
first
no.
come, first serve, get
It's-
here, sleep at night, overnight, be here first in
We
the
can
morning.
expedite the process.
Get a
Yes,
stamp.
we've got
Yeah,
it streamlined and we're going to
not football
expedite it.
tickets from-
Correct.
Back in the
Yes,
day.
we can expedite the process for them so that they will know quickly. A lot of the information that we would typically ask for, like STAR scores, attendance, we have that. We can gather that.
And is tuition due all up front, or can it be paid monthly? How is that collected?
That is a discussion point we can definitely talk about. We basically said we would like for half due up front and half due before the second semester. But I think that's something that you can consider and we can decide.
So just want to share a little perspective on my thinking around it. I certainly value every student that comes through our doors, whether they get here through a home purchase or a tuition program or a scholar. They're a Lovejoy kid. And I've conveyed that to multiple people that I've spoken to, but I think that's first and foremost what any family or kid should take away from the discussion. The venue which we choose to get here is not a divisive component. And I prefer those that use it that way to stop and focus on the fact that we want kids to attend our schools, one. The variance between what we're capturing and what it actually costs us to bring kids through our door is fairly substantial. And I think we tend to extract from the equation the fact that we have open seats to not recognize the inherent cost in housing 300 extra kids in our buildings, especially over the course of time. The other thing that philosophically I think we need to do is wean ourselves from a reliance on Lovejoy Scholars for core funding. That is not proven stable for our district over the course of time, whether it be for political reasons, whether it be misinformation, or whether it be uncertainty around what will or will not happen with attendance there. So as we continue to work through this budget process and right-size the district, I certainly want to see the Scholars Program enhance what we're doing here. I don't necessarily know that we can get to what it actually costs to make it desirable for the kids, but there's certainly a cost there. The cash flow constraints are an issue, and we need to solve that. Having discussions around making payroll are not something that I want to consider again, nor did I enjoy this time. And so to solve for that's a non-negotiable. The desire to do something where we make it as affordable as possible for transfers to come back is important to me. I want them all to walk back through the doors. Ultimately, they have to decide if the value that's there for what we offer is enough for them to invest. And that's ultimately their decision individually. So I think I want to put our best foot forward to allow that to occur. And then for new scholars, I believe that we need to consider the split rate. I certainly would love to see the lower rate extend to the family and not necessarily the student. So if a family has another child that's going to enter into Lovejoy at a future time, I'd love to see us extend that lower number if they're already here. And I want to see every one of these kids graduate from Lovejoy. I hope the community will certainly rally around the fact that we're all one family. And the venue with which we get here is not a divisive topic. It's just a different venue. And we as a board chose to do it, and we all need to get behind that. So those are some feelings I have about it. I think the core funding component is an absolute, in my opinion. We have to wean ourselves off of it over time as these kids graduate through and continue to right-size our budget. Our legal obligation is to educate every taxpayer that comes through here and their kids. And the fact that we're able to offer a scholar program is icing on the top. And it's a cool thing to be able to do, especially in a public school venue, that the value that we create is there. And that's a value that's a result of amazing students, an amazing staff, and a great community. And so they get the credit for that. But I think that's also perspective that we need to keep in mind. So I like the 4,000 and the 9,000. There's certainly further deliberation to be had, but those overarching pieces are pieces that I wanted to share with the board and community about my thoughts around what we're doing with this program. We don't have any guarantees next year what our costs are going to be to educate a child, for what we're going to receive in state funding, and or what it's going to cost to pay the bills. We're in unique times, and some of those for a lot of reasons. But as much as I would love to be able to guarantee someone X dollars forever, I don't think we can do that. We don't know what that equation looks like ourselves. So to be able to do that seems unreasonable and not something that would be responsible fiscally. I do like the idea, as long as they've met their metrics, as the families are engaged in Lovejoy and being productive and appropriate in how they conduct themselves, and they're being great citizens and students, that there shouldn't be a lot of question that those kids continue to be able to attend here. And a process that supports that, I think, is appropriate. So those are some feelings I have about it, and I just wanted to share that.
I want to make sure I understand a few things. I've had a few questions. First, I want to say thank you for all the hard work you put in, not only to the financial projections for our first budget workshop. That was fantastic work. I cannot tell you how excited I am about going through that process. As hard and as difficult as this is, I'm glad to see the levers being pushed and or being moved and the buttons being pushed and all those kinds of things to see exactly where we stand. And the other thing I like to see, like I enjoyed reading about, was understanding what the total cost it takes to educate a student in Lovejoy ISD. Maybe different in other school districts, but for Lovejoy ISD, I now for the first time really understand what the total cost is. And I did some number crunching. I want to make sure I understand this correctly. So the student, I can't remember if I used the enrolled student or the ADA. The numbers are not drastically different. But essentially, if you take the all the funds except bonds and debt, the two things that we can have some discussion about, if you take those out, we that number is right around $4,200. So if you take general, everything that is not bonds and debt, add that up, subtract it out, our total cost, 14,364, add those up, it comes out to right around 4,000. Or another way of saying it is add bonds and debt up, and that's the cost. So it's right at that number that you mentioned, $4,000.
That also doesn't take into
The
account
general fund.
the amortization of our debt and the equity in our assets. The fact that we're going to, at some point, issue additional bonds to maintain these facilities and update them and keep them up to speed. So there's another component that's unquantifiable to some extent. There's math equations we could solve to guess at it, but certainly there's additional cost over and above this that we're not taking into account today that is a factor as well.
Absolutely. And that was kind of my point, is that we're still at 4,000, still offering, our district is offering value to these tuition students. Because you could factor in some of the debt as a cost of educating that student. And at the returning student rate at around 4,000, we still, Lovejoy is having to kick some stuff in there. So it's, I think, fair what we're doing.
One of
Anyway,
your
so-
slides, Jennifer, you had estimated the 560,000 benefit. Where did you pull that number from as far as part of this presentation?
That's a great question. So that was generated using the gray mark for returning scholars at $4,000 annual tuition at a 75% retention rate,
So
that 328,000 gain plus the gain. And again, just pick that gray mark at 9,000 with a total of
It just went to the next one.
I think that was the net minus the graduating.
Okay. So thinking about it 75% still, and so if we were to get 75% and have the $4,000 level and some new number for a likely scenario of new, minus graduations, minus maybe 20 for current homes, we're also talking about other areas for future consideration in that same slide where you had talked about a possible VATRE, current taxpayers having to contribute another 760,000. We're also talking about the potential for extracurricular fees to add into this. We're asking from everybody, right? We're not singling anybody out if we do anything like this. There's a lot that needs to be done, from zero-based budgeting to efficiencies within departments to scholars to all of the stakeholders, right?
We're overturning every rock.
Kind of back to my cash flow question and payment of the tuition. I guess how critical is it to all be collected versus if there were a need to pay it out? Does that hinder us?
I've spoken with the folks taking in funds just out of curiosity to ask questions. They haven't shared that there have been a lot of hardships with paying that
Okay.
on a semester basis.
Okay.
But I don't know if you.
Yes, from what I understand, I think it's easiest on a semester basis, looking at the volume and those types of things.
The last thing we want to do is to get into a circumstance where we're having to make decisions on a lack of payment during the course of the year.
Correct. Yes,
And if it's
correct.
if it's too much of a burden to do per semester, then perhaps it might not be,
That's all.
unfortunately, it might not be the right fit. But the last thing we want to do is being able to not collect a monthly fee and ask a kid. We don't want to be in that situation.
Right, correct.
So looking at the charts, and I know the big mystery here, the big unknown number is at say a tuition of 4,000, is it 75 returning or 50, right? Like, we just don't know. But it looks like on the next slide, so what I'm concerned about is that if it does drop to 50%, the negative number that you have down there, gain loss, 375, 648.
And
Tell me how we get there, or how that's,
Fix it, you mean? Or
or why that is what it is.
that's a great question. And what we did is we looked at past retention rates. So we feel like that 50% kind of represents a worst case scenario. Our worst case scenario was, or really our trend is about 47%. So if we look at this rate, we would have a net decrease from current year of 375,648. So if you coupled that with a likely scenario at the 9,000, we would be at a loss compared to current year.
And again, that's a comparison to current year.
Correct.
All right.
By knowing that early, can you make an adjustment? Do you have a plan in mind? Like, As far as the returning.
Unfortunately, the way that the statute requires that we implement a tuition-based
I'm not
program,
saying on a price, just on some other, like, what would we do to avoid that loss? Maybe in another area if it was 50 or whatever.
as far as a backup plan to recover the 375,000, I don't think
Could-
we have anything in
Okay.
place or identified at this point.
Would we know though before we approve the budget?
Yes.
That's what I'm asking.
Yep.
Because what are we thinking as far as when we want them to tell us by? End of April?
End of April for returning, yes, ma'am.
So we'd have a pretty good idea of how
We would
bad
know.
or
We'll
good.
give you updates.
We would know.
And then, okay, that's what I wanted to know. Sorry, I didn't make that
No,
clear.
that's
I had a lot.
She knew
of
what you were
thoughts.
saying.
I know.
So we used to charge an average of 10,000. We're contemplating 4,000 for returning scholars and future family members that aren't in the, based on Barrett's comments. I like that idea. If someone's not here yet, but they're a future family member. 4,000 versus, and we're not talking about any breakdown anymore between primary or secondary, but we're talking about less than 50% of what it used to be at a $4,000 number. We've got to go at this in what we think is fair. There's assumptions that we're not going to know perfect information. That's always the case in school finance. I think that something less than 50% of what we used to charge all the way through, these families didn't have to pay anything this year, which was a great benefit. I don't think that's an unfair proposal. The 9,000 for future scholars is less than what we used to charge on average. That also seems fair. And it doesn't set us up for being so dependent with such a high number that we're putting ourselves at risk if the legislature proposes something in the future. I think these are reasonable options to consider.
I have one question. It's not related to, but would we envision, say the sibling who's not here yet, but older brother or sister is here and is in the returning scholar program?
The 4,000.
Would those applications be processed preferentially along with the returners
We would do everything we can, yes.
before we open that up?
Yeah.
Okay. That's just
How
another,
fast they can get them in,
sure, I understand.
but yes.
I mean, we recognize every year we've ever approved this, it's always been a year by year thing based on availability. This is a different situation. We were
Yeah.
dealt with something, uncertainties over the last couple of years that we couldn't have foreseen. And I realize it's impacting families and their budgets and real situations. Our first priority is the financial sustainability of the district, and we have to look at it that way. And I think this is reasonable.
There's no other discussion. I'll need if we're ready to make a motion, or we can talk about it more, but
I don't have any different views.
no different view.
I'll make the motion if everyone's ready. So I move we approve returning scholars at 4,000 and new scholars at 9,000, and that we give siblings of returning families the same rate, the same lower rate of
4,000.
4,000 or whatever it is, you know. Did I get that right?
Yes.
Okay.
So moved Ann Smith.
Second.
Second Marvin Bobo. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. And to follow on to that, you guys will be putting out guidance for those folks
Absolutely, absolutely.
ASAP.
Yes, Mrs. Koenig will be handling communication to our current Lovejoy Scholar families to make sure they get all of the pertinent information and timelines. And if they have any questions, they are more
Please
than
feel free to
welcome
contact me,
reach
yes.
out to her directly.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Hannah.
Okay.
All right, item 14.
Item
Board.
14 is board resolution amendment to the compensation plan for long-term guest educators. We all know right now teacher shortages, they have impacted our ability to fill long-term guest educator positions when we have vacancies at this point of the school year. But we're highly committed to maintaining a high-quality learning experience for all students and working in alignment with our focus of financial sustainability also. So in alignment with both of these commitments, we're proposing a resolution to declare a public purpose and allowing administration to increase the daily rate of guest educators that meet the outlined criteria in the attached resolution. The criteria includes a degree in the subject area and substituting for 60 or more days. The resolution is required to modify the compensation plan previously adopted by the Board of Trustees and relates solely to guest educators only that meet the criteria outlined in the attached resolution. And this resolution would expire at the end of the 21-22 instructional year. The resolution is attached for your review. This is something that I fully believe we do what's best for kids and kids come first. And so that is why the administration recommends consideration and action on the attached resolution amending the compensation plan for long-term guest educators meeting specific criteria. I will tell you this specific person. I have had contact with the campus principal every week just to check on the process, and her first words to me was phenomenal. This teacher's taking the extra step. She's a problem solver. She's tutoring kids after school without being asked. She has been in our district for approximately about 4 years. Just very, very positive comments.
So moved.
Oh, you move?
Second.
Yep.
Okay.
I don't think you
Second,
can move as the president, but we'll move. So move.
What do you mean I can't?
No, you can't. You have to ask for it, but also move.
Can I move?
Yeah, so move.
You just did.
I'll second that.
Learn something every day.
Thank you.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Now vote.
You were excited.
You can
You
vote.
had to move.
All right. Lovejoy 2030 strategic planning update.
You did.
Huh?
So you got excited for that.
I was excited.
You were ready to move.
Good evening. I am so excited to share an update with you regarding our Lovejoy 2030 strategic planning effort. We know that excellence is by design, and that as we move forward with purpose and strength, we want to make sure that we are coming together, getting our stakeholders' voice at the table so that we are able to continue to provide the best possible education for our students and meet their needs in a very evolving world. This is an action shot of our Lovejoy 2030 Strategic Planning Committee. We were privileged to have the opportunity to meet with them last Monday. We have about 60 members of this committee. The committee consists of students, parents, community members, and our staff. You can see them there. We've got Mrs. Halpin, our principal from Sloan Creek Intermediate there, action shot with her subgroup. And we are guided by some strategic planning priorities. We, of course, want to make sure that we further our legacy of excellence, prepare our students to be future ready, and achieve financial sustainability. We know that we are responsible for providing a safe, secure, and well-maintained learning environment, that it's critical that we recruit, retain, and support an effective teacher in every classroom and an effective principal in every school. We are ensuring alignment between our core values as well as our mission to make sure that we achieve high levels of learning for each Lovejoy ISD student. And then we are continuing to maximize student opportunities through this effort to make sure that we fulfill on our commitment to our Lovejoy ISD graduate profile. We also are guided by some strategic planning principles to achieve that alignment. We are making sure that we are not short-sighted and that we are thinking about both the near-term and long-term implications of our actions and decisions. That, again, that legacy of excellence, future-ready skills, and financial sustainability is prioritized. And then we are going to produce a sustainable plan that actually carries us forward and fulfills our mission. And we will build upon the support and investment of our incredible community by listening, encouraging input, and maintaining transparency throughout this process. This presentation is part of that commitment to transparency. I'm very proud to say that we've accomplished meeting 1. We've got a check mark by meeting 2 as well. At this last meeting, our committee engaged with their different focus areas, which I'll talk about in a minute. They explored possibilities, examined strengths, weaknesses, and opportunities. They went through the scope of their strategic target, created some draft strategic targets, and jumped into identifying strategies. One of the questions we asked ourselves at the beginning of this process on last Monday was, will we think big enough? We want what we're going after to be out of reach, but not out, just out of reach, but not out of sight. Because if this is 2030, then we know that this needs to really move us forward in terms of innovation and opportunities for our students. We were inspired by Rear Admiral Grace Hopper, who is a pretty instrumental figure in computer science. She's actually developed some programming languages, and a famous quote she has that we really drew inspiration from is, the most damaging phrase in our language is, it has always been done that way. So we are challenged because we have a very strong and important core ideology that's founded in our mission and our core values, and that is what we stand for and why we want to exist. So we want to hold to that while we build towards that envisioned future. This is a picture of gumbo, probably a little late for something this spicy, but there's a good reason this is here. We have a tradition in my family. We go to Florida each summer. We've been going down there since I was an infant. And every time we go on a family vacation, my youngest brother, Sean, starts a pot of gumbo, and we go fishing and scalloping and crabbing, and we add to the pot throughout the week. And I've watched my brother have this tradition with my niece and nephew, and it's a pretty beautiful thing. And then I was very excited when I had Jacob and Claire, and we started bringing them on these trips, that my daughter Claire became very interested in her Uncle Sean's process of making the gumbo. And so she would fish with him and then come and add the fish to the pot in the evening. And every night she was checking on it and was very, very proud that we were going to be serving that gumbo one evening to everyone. And so she helped get the bowls out and she helped set the table. And finally, my brother Sean scooped her some gumbo into her bowl, and Claire looked absolutely stricken. She was in shock. You could see the disappointment resonate throughout her little body. Because at the time she was about 4 years old, and she thought all week that they were working on making gumballs. I don't know how she could have thought those ingredients would result in gumballs, but she was extremely disappointed. We used that story to talk about the importance of clarity preceding competence. We all have to have a shared, clear understanding of where we want to go if we're going to be able to get there together. We also know that part of that clarity is us all knowing our roles. And the role of the Strategic Planning Committee is, of course, advisory. They are representing our community, the members that are not able to be in the room. And obviously, we want them to be an effective champion both throughout this process and then also in carrying forward our actionable plan. We are working in 7 different working groups: teaching and learning, graduate profile, legacy of excellence, financial sustainability, operations, future ready, and then talent acquisition, retention, and support. You'll notice that that financial sustainability arm is actually handled by our Financial Sustainability Committee, because as you've noticed, we certainly needed it to do a deeper dive and take a little bit more time in that area. So we're very thankful to those 40 individuals that are serving on that committee and very much consider them a part of our strategic planning effort. And we will see in our products some of the results and recommendations of their work. So we're working towards those products, future ready skills, strategic targets, strategies, and key indicators. We got real specific on Monday and talked about what our actual strategic plan would look like. And within our strategic plan, there will be a number of scorecards that identify a strategic target, which is where we are going, strategies, which is what we will do, what actions we will take to arrive at that goal, and then of course key indicators, which is how we will measure our progress towards that goal. We've got an example there for you. You can see that stated again, where we're going, strategic targets, how we're going to get their strategy, and then those key indicators. We talked about the importance of clarifying where we're going with a non-example. These are all great things, right? Two-way communication is very important. We prioritize that here. We also think weekly principal video updates would be great. I love chili. I also think a district Google Calendar would be a wonderful thing. Adopting a school program is a wonderful thing. But these are things that we could do next month, right? These are not things that we would be really stretching forward to accomplish. So you won't see these type of things in our strategic plan. You'll see those opportunities we have in front of us to really move forward in our practices of serving our students. We are so grateful to our working group leaders. They have a pretty heavy lift and they did an incredible job last Monday. It was very fun for me to see what incredible teachers they all are. They have not lost the stuff since they have left the classroom, but you can see who's leading each subcommittee there. We also talked about inputs equal outputs. We can have the most outstanding process in the world, but it's really the people in the room with the passion and commitment to our students, leaning into that process and working together to create something that none of us could do individually that is the true power and differentiator. And I can most certainly tell you that we've got absolutely incredible people on this committee that are doing just that. Part one, we did our working group scope, current state, and possibilities. Part two, we did a SWOT analysis, which I know many of you are familiar in the business realm that is an analysis that involves looking at strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. We did this in each of those subgroup areas and utilize that as a reference for us moving forward. That's an example of the type of chart we used to conduct the analysis. Then we jumped into an affinity diagram process, which is otherwise known as death by Post-it note. We had, yeah, they all laughed. We used a lot of Post-it notes to make sure that all of our committee members had the opportunity to really get their input on the table. But this process allows us to get everybody's ideas out on the table, helps us then to arrange that information and then organize it in a meaningful fashion to move forward. Another action shot, you can see all those Post-it notes there with the brilliant thinking of those committee members. They are having phenomenal conversation in those pictures and really generating some incredible ideas. This is how we actually took all those Post-it notes and made meaning out of it. So we took these Post-it notes and then we're actually building our scorecards from them. The groups of Post-it notes became categories that were then given a header. That header was used to inspire our strategic targets on our draft scorecards. I'll skip that draft scorecard again. And you can see right there, if anyone's interested, again, this is posted publicly, they can see this crosswalk between the headers, the ideas that were generated, and how it moves into that actual development of the strategic plan. We challenged ourselves with some questions that support strong strategic targets. Is the idea or the thought exciting and compelling? Does it positively impact students? Does it align with our strategic planning principles and priorities? Is it a mid to long-term goal? Is it specific? Can it be clearly defined? Is it relevant now and over time? And is it attainable and something that we truly can influence? We jumped in feedback rotations, so our committee members were able to see and hear the thinking of the different groups and give others feedback. We meet again on Tuesday, April 5th. I'm very excited about that. We will continue to polish those scorecards and dive into key indicators. Our strategic planning committee has also asked for an update on the work of the Financial Sustainability Committee. So Jennifer gets to give another presentation, but she has it ready to go clearly. So hopefully minimum prep for her, but she'll make sure that this committee is updated and has the opportunity to ask questions. What questions do you have for me?
Comments, the students were impressive. And I really enjoyed getting to know them. Every one of them I interacted with were impressive. So
Our students are absolutely outstanding, and I'm so impressed with how engaged they are. We have 12 students that serve on this committee.
yeah, they did a great job. Thank you for the update. All right, cabinet reports.
That's how you get the chair closest.
Is there anything left for you?
I'm going to talk about operations. I'm really excited about it. I did. Hold up. So a few updates on finance and operations. So a couple items we haven't discussed yet this evening are related to updates on compensation grants, the work of the Financial Sustainability Committee, and operations items. So good news. So we discussed that we had submitted for the strategic compensation grant. It was due on February 4th. We were selected as a district to participate in an interview with TEA towards the goal of achieving this grant. So even being shortlisted is actually quite the compliment. So Lori and Katie and Anna and several other team members were on a call with TEA a couple of weeks ago, right? I think. And so we were discussing options for strategic compensation, and this grant is designed to provide a fellowship to the district, essentially to hire a staff member to would compensate that staff member for a year or two to assist in development of a strategic compensation program. So an exciting opportunity. We have yet to hear back. We'll be notified by April 15th if we do achieve that grant. So wanted to give a quick update on that. Also in regard to the teacher incentive allotment, we have discussed this a little bit in the past, that these are state-funded incentives to high-performing teachers through a national certification or locally designated system. This does require a third-party evaluation instrument with that, so that you can demonstrate the validity and reliability of the evaluation instrument that the district is using. We did submit intent for cohort E, non-binding, back in December as part of our application for the strategic fellowship grant. And the application for this teacher incentive allotment is due on April 15th. So while we know that the strategic fellowship grant would give us an opportunity to hire somebody using state funds to assist in development of compensation programs and updates to evaluation instruments and tying student success into that process, we won't know until April 15th if we got the strategic fellowship grant, and the TIA application is due April 15th. So we're doing the work to submit all this information, and then we'll evaluate once we know more about that, what our implementation plan may look like. But it's going to be important, and we've already had some very good discussions and planning around how to involve all of our stakeholder groups and teachers in this conversation around what teacher incentive allotment could look like, what evaluation instrument could look like, what measuring our student performance could look like. So we're going to continue to evaluate these items. It is a long-term process, so the implementation of such a program, the very earliest it would occur would be in 2023-24, and payouts wouldn't begin until 2024-25. But we are going to continue in those discussions. The Financial Sustainability Committee met on March 15th for their 4th meeting. And so the goals of that meeting were to really dive into subtopic inquiry. So the work of the affinity diagrams and exercises that the committee had done in a prior meeting helped identify subtopics within the Financial Sustainability Committee that they wanted to dive deeper into. And so on in March, we began the process of diving into each of those 4 subtopic group areas and alternating with smaller groups so that we could really dive into these topics: revenue generation, efficiency measures, program analysis, and legacy of excellence. So you'll see some of the subtopics within each of those groups that feature there. And so this is what it looks like when you put people in the gumbo. I couldn't help it. So they did a lot of great work. It might have looked like gumbo sometimes, but it was starting to look pretty good. So some really great feedback. I was excited to really finally be able to delve in some of that deep small group discussion around each of these items. So really enjoy that. I'm really looking forward to our next meeting in April. So the key takeaways from meeting 4 here, that our current year budget was developed based on that higher attendance rate, which we've discussed earlier, higher enrollment and attendance rate. That budget management measures have been put into place for the current year, and that we've identified these 4 focus areas for financial sustainability, as we also want to ensure that we're continuing. You'll see items in there like legacy of excellence. So that is part of the subtopics that we're considering as financial sustainability. We know that there's areas there that we need to be attentive to as well. So that was the March 15th meeting. As you can see, there's been a number of meetings already, and they will meet on April 12th next. So in terms of operations, I don't think there's any dollar signs in this presentation. The scoreboards are installed. So we can see how our baseball and softball teams are doing in a more readable fashion. They look really great. The practice field turf is installed, so we're really wrapping up a lot of those projects that we started. High school athletic buildings inspections and punch list items are finishing up. The detention pond work behind the high school is finishing up. The high school lighting probably will last a little bit longer till the end of April. We're still waiting for concession heaters. I think they're on a pirate ship from Spain. I'm not sure, but eventually we will get the concession heaters, probably by the time we need them again. But that is kind of one of those last remaining items on the winter storm Uri repairs that remain. And last but not least, the LCDC playground canopy is still expected in May, along with the fencing we'll do after that. So there is a nice picture of the softball field. Nice scoreboard. Don't they look good?
Yeah.
Thank you. We did have a little bit of a windstorm on March 21st. So we did have some minimal storm damage, nothing that we would file a claim over, but just wanted to mention some of it was to portables and small areas of roofing. So all minor repairs that wouldn't meet our deductible, but we are working on rectifying those. It really just expedited the process of us turning off the power to one of the portables too. So as we get ready to empty those out and put them on the auction block, this is our schedule. So we have been working on identifying and cataloging our surplus items. That's kind of the beginning of the dominoes that fall in order for us to sell the portables that we're no longer using. Those items are first offered to other districts, campuses, staff members who want to use them for district purposes. They can move those until the end of the month. So they do have a couple more days. And then we will put those out to auction on Renee Bates. So we'll have that open. And then once that is complete, we'll know what we can deem salvage or remove for other purposes. And then we'll be able to empty those portables out and get them to auction and sold before the end of the fiscal year. So one other item, integrated pest management, is the method by which school districts have to address pest management in a public building. So why are we talking about this? Because it's required that we have an IPM program in Lovejoy ISD. And as I discovered shortly before spring break, we did not have an updated designated person or a written IPM program. So we've kind of revisited that. We've looked at all the IPM approaches in general, the idea is that we want to address pests in facilities at the least possible interruptive chemical measure possible. So just like at home, if you see 3 ants, you don't call the exterminator, you wipe them up and you move on and you see if it happens again. It's kind of a similar approach. And we also want to apply exclusion measures. So we're keeping the pests from coming in the building to begin with, removing attractants, things like that. Just because we know in our schools, we will eventually have children that have upper respiratory issues that could be irritated. So we're just very cognizant of those items. So just wanted to bring that to your attention because we have named our responsible IPM coordinator, Alex Roman, and we will now be posting the required postings that we have to do when we're doing treatments in a facility. So you may see postings that you haven't seen before, and it's just required that we do that. We've also updated our asbestos designated person, and you're looking at her. So we have updated that documentation as well. So we're kind of going through all of our environmental compliance pieces and making sure that we have everything up to date. And so that's my operations update. Anybody have any questions?
Are you going to add asbestos designated person to your official title?
It's exciting. It's very exciting. Actually, there's the first district I've been in that has 0 asbestos. So it makes that job really very exciting.
It's a new school.
Kevin just volunteered to be that person, yeah. Okay, I'm going to talk tonight to go in a little bit more detail. You've heard us talking about master scheduling probably since December, and we've been working on it since late October, early November. So we have some information we want to bring forth, and we're really excited about the opportunities that we're going to be able to afford our students with their learning experience and also our staff. And I just want to preface, I'm going to give just some highlights of what has transpired on the campuses, but I don't want to take the thunder away from our principals because they are communicating and working with staff on this, and will also be communicating more details to parents. So I'm going to kind of just give you a high level look at it tonight. So, and you're going to hear me talk a little bit about House Bill 4545. And if you remember, that is recent legislation that does require school districts to provide accelerated instruction for students who do not pass the reading or math portions of STAR, 3rd through 8th grade, and then also your end of course tests. So there are some restrictions with that instruction has to be provided either before or after school or within the school day in addition to the regular instruction period. So it can't take the place, it can't be done, for example, if you're receiving it for reading, it cannot be done during the reading period. It have to be over and beyond that. So we found some pathways through our master scheduling that we feel like we can provide some great opportunities for this to occur. Okay. So just let me define master scheduling. It's the function of it is to arrange the allotted time for staff, students, and the fiscal resources for optimum learning to occur. So really what it's telling us, it's the time that teachers meet with students for how long in the areas of study. It sounds very simple, but it's not as simple as it sounds. So the priorities, it represents whether explicit or implicit or critical aspect of defining how learning takes place in the school. So you've heard us talk a lot about how we're scheduling students who have more complex schedules ahead of time. It's the first piece of this rather than on the back end of that, really looking at individual student needs through this process. So just some highlights I want to bring forth, just to kind of give you a timeline of how we have been working on this. Again, these discussions began back in November, and this was with principals, directors, Coach Ross, Dr. Matthews was involved in it, coordinators, cabinet members. So it was, we started this journey together. And the factors that drive master scheduling, it's our course offerings and selection. So we're right in the heart of that right now with our middle school and high school. Students are going through the selection process, and that will drive the master scheduling. We have to look at staffing considerations and staff certifications as well. Student enrollment in those courses, and then the resources. So kind of want to highlight, I told Katie, I said, this is probably the most beautiful I use the word beautiful, elementary schedule I think I've ever seen. When you look at, I don't think I've ever seen an elementary schedule that the elementary teachers had 60 minutes of planning time. That's a big win. And that time is so crucial for our teachers. In fact, I met with some first grade teachers today, and they were talking about the importance of when they can come together in that planning, that they really do value that. And some of that was kind of compromised with some vertical planning that they were able to do in the past, and they'd like to see that come back. So I certainly understand that. So we're going to be increasing right now they're receiving 45 minutes daily of planning time, and that's going to go to 60 minutes next year every day. And then also that results that students will participate in either art, music, or PE each day during that planning period while teachers are together. We're going to incorporate a 30-minute flex period, and basically that's that time where we can provide intervention and enrichment for students. So it's where you're going to see some small group instruction occurring. It's where we can implement the House Bill 4545. And right now the principals are kind of working through that of how that would be built in per grade level or across the campus. We also are going to have some concentrated blocks of time for teaching the content areas, and that's an important aspect too, especially with our youngest students, of having that concentrated in uninterrupted time to where it's not fragmented for our students. And then of course the students will have a 30-minute lunch period and 30-minute recess. So those were just some highlights of our elementary campuses.
Hey, Lori,
Mhm.
go back to the slide. What are they getting right now in art, music, or PE? Is that is it a change, or is it just a rescheduling?
It's just really a rescheduling, I believe. Right, Holly? There's not really a change in art, music, or PE from what they're receiving right now.
But there's an increase in the time.
Well, minutes, correct, yes. Yes,
Okay, that's
mhm, correct.
kind of where I was headed.
Yeah, I'm
but
sorry. I
also
thought you meant the
maybe they had
frequency.
additional art
Yeah.
periods, additional music.
Right, right. They'll have.
So this is
extended
actually
time.
added.
Added time.
So the
Mhm,
teachers
And the
get more planning time and the kids get
students
more time in
receive-
instruction,
correct.
It's beautiful, just like Dr. Smith
just
said.
Yeah,
by
it's
changing
beautiful.
the master schedule. Who would have thunk? Thank you.
Sure. And then at Sloan Creek, Mrs. Halpin's been doing some work with her staff on making some shifts over there, and we're super excited about these opportunities that our students are going to be afforded. We're going to shift from an 8-period day right now that we have over at Sloan to a 6-period day for our 6th graders. So that extends their current period from 45 minutes to 60 minutes for those sections. And even from what we've seen from the first period of the day to the last period of the day, that was really not even 45 minutes just because of arrival and dismissal that interferes with that. So students were not getting a total of 45 minutes as we would have hoped. We're going to be shifting from an 8-period day to 5-period day for 5-period day for 5th grade. So that will extend their period from 45 minutes to 70 minutes. So if you see this is a big deal here. And I'm talking with our science coordinators and our teachers, 45 minutes when we're instructing students, and that's a state testing grade level for science, we feel like that has impacted our student outcomes too. So more concentrated time in those areas should help with our 5th grade performance. Again, we're going to be working on a flex time that allows teachers that time to provide intervention and enrichment opportunity for our students. And Mrs. Halpin has also talked a little bit about maybe some choice opportunities for that with our students during that period. She's working through that right now. So that might mean with clubs or areas of interest that they may have during those periods. Again, we'll have protected blocks of time for the core content areas.
Can you explain that a little bit further on what we're giving up when we go from 8 to 6 and what it means by the protected blocks? Can you dig into that a little bit?
For example, right now we have a STEM class, and so that's one of the classes that the students are, right, Courtney, from what we're taking away, but when we're not putting it in that 45-minute block, we're going to be incorporating that into the instruction that we're providing for students. So it's not going to be a separate class. It's going to be incorporated into our science and math classes. I can't speak directly, Jason, directly to what that, I can get you that information though, but Courtney's going to be able to provide that more clearly than I will. When I say concentrated blocks of time, that means uninterrupted. So what you might have, and probably more so at the elementary level, to where you might have 30 minutes of math, then you might have recess, and you might come back and have another 45 minutes of math. When I say uninterrupted, that's what I mean by that. Also, we're going to be increasing the frequency of our PE classes for all students by moving coaches' schedules to full-time PE teachers. You've heard Mr. Parker talk about that too, to where we will have, we've had coaches instructing our students in PE on the elementary and the intermediate school. So this is going to allow for additional sections because they will not have to leave for their coaching periods at the beginning or end of the day. We're also going to be able to implement we'll have a 60-minute planning period for 6th grade teachers and a 70-minute planning period for 5th grade teachers. That is a decrease from what they are receiving right now. We do want to point that out because right now, because they were running an 8-period day, they had 2 45-minute planning periods. So Courtney has been in conversation with the 5th and 6th grade teachers, and 6th grade teachers do understand they're going to have less, but they're good with it according to what she's been sharing. So she's been having some great conversations and planning opportunities with her staff with that. Also recently, there were changes to their arrival and dismissal process over at Sloan Creek, and we're seeing efficiencies of the master schedule just with that alone. You wouldn't think that, but those minutes that with getting kids in the building and out of the building at the end of the day is allowing to add more time to the instruction day.
It has made a big difference.
Good.
I speak to that
Good.
personally. Thank you for
We are not making any changes to fine art offerings with the changes in the schedule for 6th grade, so that's a win as well. Students will still have the same options and choices when it comes to fine arts in 6th grade. And then we also have an opportunity that Courtney has worked out to where we have some teachers that are going to be teaching both 5th and 6th grades for GT. So they will have, a student could potentially have the same teacher for GT in 5th grade and the same teacher in that core content area for 6th grade too, which can be a win. Willow, we are going to maintain the 8-period schedule. There's been, discussions whether or not we would change that. We feel like at this time that is what we are recommending we move forward with for 22-23. We are going to be offering a single block math with the option of a math lab period. What we're finding is that some of our students who may not be ready for the advanced or the Algebra 1 math courses were in double block, and then they would need an additional time for math, another lab time. And so what that means is that we're taking away an elective option for them, so they would have basically math 3 periods a day if you have one double block or you have a double block and a single. So the on-level math courses are going to actually be single block, and then we'll maintain the double block for advanced and Algebra 1 math courses, and then we're going to offer a math lab for students, and that'll be based on student needs on the math lab. We will incorporate what we're calling, I believe it's going to be called leopard time over at Willow Springs next year. Mr. Coder had success with a similar program when he was in Allen ISD with this time. And basically what it is, it's an opportunity for students to have voice and choice during the school day. And within that block of time, they'll have a chance to participate in academic and social activities. And it will allow for intervention and additional help for students who need it. And will also be rewarding for students who've completed their work and are doing a good job. So it's kind of creating a little bit of independence and choice in that. It will not take away from any instructional time. he is working with his staff right now on how that's going to be scheduled during the day. So he's coming with some experience with that and successful experience too. So more to come on that. Coaching assignments will be concentrated again in serving just our middle school students. So that's going to alleviate travel and sharing between campuses and more efficiency with the master scheduling. And then we will maintain the 2 45-minute daily planning periods at Willow as they've had in the past. And Lovejoy High School, we are recommending we maintain an 8-period schedule. We will be offering some opportunities for students who might require some increased concentrated support in the area of mathematics. And so we are going to be double blocking some classes that will be offered for Algebra 1, Geometry, Algebra 2, and Pre-Cal. And we are adding a math lab. And again, that will be based on needs of students. So that's that additional time period during the day for students who need a more concentrated approach with supporting them in math. And that aligns with the guidelines of House Bill 4545. And we also are going to be adding a 4th-year advanced math course that we have not had in the past for our seniors, the advanced qualitative reasoning course. And we are looking at we're reviewing a possibility of adding a reading language arts lab course similar to the math lab course that would assist some of our students who need some additional help in the area of reading and writing and their English language arts. Again, coaching assignments will be concentrated in serving students at the high school to alleviate travel and maximize time. And then we will maintain the 2 45-minute daily planning periods for our teachers as well there.
Is that for core and the electives?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Correct. We're really excited about it. I think the principals are too, and more to come.
Thank you.
Again.
Usually this time of year, of course, we would be rearing up and getting ready for recruitment and hiring season. But we are still focusing on efficiency measures with staffing here in Lovejoy. Some of the things that we've done is we've updated work calendars to avoid that 48-hour work week and giving some of our employees options so that we would not have that 48-hour work week. So that's what we've just finished is updating our work calendars. We're also, as you can see, Dr. Tinsley shared that we determined the master schedule blocks, and that also will help us with staffing efficiencies for next year to see where we need teachers, where they need to be moved, and that helps facilitating those staff transfers. So we're hoping to move on with staff transfers this next few week or so, mainly thinking about our coaches. They've applied for some PE teaching positions and letting them know that, that they will be receiving those and transferring into those positions. We're reviewing stipends as we go through, and as we review stipends, last week we met with all of our campus leaders and went through each campus and where what those stipends were. Also looking at how we can be a little bit more efficient with those, because we know stipends are extra duties, and knowing that what that expectation is. So we'll be looking at those also as we continue, and just continuing to monitor position postings as those come available. I think at cabinet and during times talking with our principals, we just want to support them and their needs on their campus, but monitor those positions to see if there are other ways that we can cover those without having perhaps hire someone. Okay.
I know we've talked a lot about attendance lately, and there were some, I think, misperceptions that we could clear up by talking about funded absences versus unfunded absences. So I'm going to lift a couple of things that Dr. Duplessis spoke about. As of March 17th of this year, earlier this month, we had a total of 30,411 absences. in the district. And we all know that that's tied to ADA, which is tied to funding. And you can see over the past few years how that has compared to previous years, that we've already surpassed all of those years over the past 5. It's also important to note, and you saw this one earlier, the difference in our ADA, which we're typically around the 96, even above percentage, and we're down to 94.07 this year. You also saw this, the difference between how many of our absences are COVID related, so we can tie those back to students being out sick and those that are not. But what I really wanted to bring you to is how that applies to funding. With our current enrollment of 4,361 students, a 1% reduction in our ADA results in approximately over $316,000 a year. If you go back and tie that to, or compare that to last year, and we're with a difference of that about 2.34%, we're losing over $740,000 compared to last year. So the part that I really wanted to highlight is what are the difference between funded absences and unfunded absences, right? And and there's many more. I don't think that anybody's going to go through and look at the attendance handbook that the TEA has online. So I brought a couple of things out of that, and there's more in there if you want to go in there and read it about what the difference is between a funded and unfunded absence. Down at the bottom of this list, and I've listed all of the ones that really could potentially apply to us. There are many more that really don't apply to us. They're very specific that don't apply to many schools. But the one at the bottom of this one is many families and parents think about a doctor's note as kind of the Willy Wonka's golden ticket to get back into school. And it gives you the magic of getting your absence funded and excused. And that's certainly not the case. The only way that a doctor's note allows you to get funded is if you are on campus for any portion of the day. So hypothetically speaking, if I have a kiddo who is at school for that day and they come to school, they get sick, they are taken to a doctor gives them a note to excuse them for that day, they get funding for that day. If, for instance, that child has the flu, and the doctor's note says, please keep this child out for the next 3 days, we don't get funding for those next 3 days, just for the day that child stepped foot on our campus and they're excused by the doctor. That's the only day. So I wanted to clear that up because, like I said, there are many families, including myself from time to time, or in the past, have thought this doctor's note, no matter how many days that doctor is giving that child an excused absence or what they think is an excused absence, it in fact does not. So
can I clarify? So on that, does the child have to be at school at 10 o'clock? So it doesn't matter if they're there at 10, but if they're there for part of the day with the doctor note, they're good.
that is
Correct.
Okay. I was confused about that part.
That is
Okay.
That's a great question.
So if they're out for 3 days and you give the doctor's note, we may see 1 day of that funding? That's right. Okay. Just the day that, I guess they initially missed. That is
Right.
correct.
Right.
If they,
The
only if
partial
they were
day
on
with the
campus for
doctor's
that
note.
1 day. Let's say they're sick in the morning, never show up to campus, gone for 3 days, we may not see anything in those 3 days?
Correct.
That is correct.
They gotta be on the campus.
Has to be a partial day with Dr. Note.
Oh, that
And I-
really makes a lot of sense.
Well, and I do want to say, we're having a funding conversation right now. Obviously, if the child is sick,
Right.
they need to be at home. And that obviously, that promotes a strong attendance rate throughout the year, because when sick people aren't coming to school, then of course
Yes.
we're not spreading things.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think the key thing too is if a kid has a doctor's appointment that's scheduled at 11 and they sleep in and don't come to school, and then they go to the doctor's appointment and then, it's only 2 hours left in the day, I'm not going back, we don't get funding for that. But if they show up at 2 o'clock
With the note.
for the last hour with the note, it's good. Yeah.
Not that we're encouraging that, but we're happy
No,
if
I'm
they
just saying,
partially come to school.
that's probably a more
We're
frequent
realistic with these
scenario.
high schoolers.
That's probably a more frequent scenario that occurs on a weekly basis.
One more, and I didn't put this in bold, but if you will look at gosh, that's hard to see. The second one, it says if the student, no, I can.
We
When
can tell.
the student is in their junior or senior year of high school and they go on a doctor's visit, I'm sorry, a college visit. I'm still talking about doctors. They get 2 excused absences for college visits, assuming that they provide documentation that they've been to those campus visits. They get 2 for their junior year and 2 for their senior year. So there are ways that we can recoup some of the lost revenue revenue from absences just for being educated on things such as this.
This first bullet point is confusing to me. What crosses the line of serious or life-threatening illness? That seems pretty subjective, because that seems like you could be sick and you could get funding. Do we?
It requires doctors' documentation. They're the ones that determine.
So
if
they
it's
determine if it's serious or life-threatening?
That's correct. We don't get to determine that.
And then if they check the box on serious or life-threatening, then we get funding?
In some of those situations, we also cross over into where some additional instructional support services are provided and students are receiving supports in those situations. So then you'd have an intersection between the Texas Attendance Accounting Handbook, which this came from, and of course, some of our specialized services. So those two things kind of merge in those situations to provide guidance.
No wonder people are confused.
Absolutely. I will tell you every time we go to I go to the handbook and I read, and it's a lot. It's a lot to wade through.
And also too, even when a kiddo goes and gets their driver's license and when they're 16 years old, they only get that once. So if they go and they fail the test, they don't get to go and do it again.
All the 16-year-olds know that one.
Any questions?
A couple of exciting areas that we've been working on and submitted grant applications for 2 grants over spring break. Both of them we should find out about mid-April on where we stand as far as being awarded. The first one is a dyslexia grant, and the nice part of the grant, we wrote it for a couple of pathways to look at some additional intervention materials for our elementary staff that have been going through the reading academies. This is a nice opportunity for them to apply some of the learning with students who need some additional intervention support. Reading academies for the district is an unfunded mandate, but it does cost the district $12,000 for each reading academy cohort. And so we put in the dyslexia grant for coverage for the upcoming year for reading academies. And because this is a 2-year grant, you'll notice I have reading academies in there because TEA has not told us exactly when it's going to be released, but there is an upcoming reading academy for 6th through 8th grade as well as pre-K. So included that cost in there because that would be an additional $12,000 cost. You heard what the action team talked about reading and reading being the gateway for all students. And so another piece that we looked at through this funding is structured literacy training for secondary and making sure that we're not only targeting, early intervention definitely is key, but there are students as they even leave elementary and are in secondary are still needing to grow in the area of reading. So definitely arming all of our teachers with additional training. We have the opportunity to look at to do a grow your own program for diagnosticians, and those are the staff members that do the academic testing. They do it not only for special education but also for dyslexia. Dyslexia doesn't always fall under the special education umbrella. But they are the staff that do the standardized testing to determine that. And so Region 10 has a dyslexia training program. So if we had some internal candidates who may be interested in moving in that direction, we would do some vetting as a district, and then this grant would allow to cover the cost of that particular program. And then moving forward, looking at some additional intervention materials for special education or students who have gone through or are going through our Take Flight program, which is our main program we use for dyslexia therapy. There's not one program that's a one size fits all. So sometimes if a student is not making progress, we do want to step back and look at, is there another pathway to do that? And so Scottish Rite actually is coming out with another program that complements Take Flight, but it is researched and based on a slower pace to be able to support students who maybe where Take Flight was faster pace and had a lot of material that was coming at a higher level. So altogether, the grant that we put in was for almost $348,000 to support the ongoing intervention and training for both special education and general education teachers in the classrooms. On the other side is the autism grant, and this is a little bit unique. TEA really puts preference on you going into a cohort with other districts. And so we were lucky enough to be able to go in with Sherman and Denison. It really doesn't change any of the pathways that we want as far as usage of the grant. It does allow us for some collaboration in other districts. One of the three districts had to be the shared service arrangement, really the keeper of the money. And so Sherman agreed to be that for this particular grant if we're awarded. What we would do is add additional curriculum to help support students with autism eligibility in both elementary and secondary, with some embedded coaching that would be on kind of on the job type coaching support to implement some of the curriculum. And then behavior training for general education as well as special education teachers. Some of the general education training, some of it is basic classroom management and then expanding from there. Additional supports and strategies for students who may have autism eligibility. But you'll find a lot of those resources are good strategies for all students. There's also a social skills curriculum that is in the works of being finalized for gearing for students who receive services through special education. So if for some reason that we found some of the district social skills curriculum that's already being used is not meeting their needs, this is another opportunity for us to support and develop those skills that we all know are important for students. And so that grant is $147,000. At the end of February, I shared we were trying to work through the logistics with Special Olympics and some of the COVID constraint requirements that has been put in place. And as a district, we were asking not only our area Special Olympics contact as well as the state, and their criteria was student athletes would be required to wear a mask during the entire event except for when they were performing, and really they also required social distancing. That's really hard if you've gone to a Special Olympics event because there's a lot of high-fiving going on and hugging, and so definitely with some barriers to be able to allow all of our student athletes to be a part of such an important opportunity. So really districts started doing a workaround, and they're doing what they're saying local tournaments. So it'll have the same feel of Special Olympics, and the events will be the same. We are not able to say it's a Special Olympics sponsored event, but we're excited to be able to go to McKinney on April 14th, Anna on April 28th, and Prosper May 18th, and that's for track and field. So our campuses are working on our student athletes getting ready for those events. And definitely when you think about our graduate profile, not only are we, and we've talked a lot tonight about just the instructional and the academic piece, but that well-roundedness of being able to showcase their athletic abilities and really work on a ton of the skills that our staff are working day in the classroom out in the community setting. So we're really excited about that. And then we'll get to celebrate the student athletes at a banquet here in the gym at the Child Development Center on May 17th. So fun times. I did share the dates with you guys, so if you're able to attend, most of the events will start at 10 if you're able to be there. Questions?
Thank you. All right.
All right, absolutely. I want to lift up and celebrate really our staff, those who are in the room and outside the room. I hope you all are noticing that we've got a strong commitment to creating a deep culture here together that's founded deeply in relationships, collaboration, ongoing learning so that we can best serve our students, and then accountability for results. We, of course, are going to mix in a bunch of fun with that too. We identified that together. And it is truly remarkable. I would have not thought we would be at this point in the process in terms of our collaboration and the way it is able to positively impact our kids. But because of these incredible leaders and their commitment, you saw it in our teachers today who were talking about our special education programming and ways we can come together to get even better at what we do. In regard to serving each individual student. I am grateful, I am humbled, and I'm truly in awe of what we are able to move forward in an environment where there are some significant pressures, but we have all been united in our commitment to using those pressures to make us better and become more effective at what we do. And to see that lived through their leadership and their actions is truly remarkable, and I am grateful.
Thank you. All right, public comments related to non-agenda items.
We have 3 this evening.
Ms. Norwood, we moved her down.
Cynthia Brood.
So let's start with Ms. Norwood because we moved her from agenda
Oh,
to non-agenda.
okay, that's fine. So Ms. Harwood,
Harwood, I'm sorry. My apologies. Just a reminder of the rules. Heard them earlier. Please abide by them.
Okay, so I would like to request an agenda item be added to the next meeting to change the review process regarding inappropriate books at our schools. I'm not sure why a review process is necessary for books at our schools that legally should not be, or books that our schools legally should not carry. So, as of this afternoon, a Court of Miss Fury was still available for student checkout at Lovejoy High School. In fact, I'm holding a copy of the screen grab for being the same. There are 12 more from the series at the high school. I'll read just one example quote from the book verbatim, but there are many more where this comes from. So I leaned down and put my mouth on him. He jerked at the contact with a barked expletive, and I laughed around him, even as I took him deeper into my mouth. His hands were now fisted in the sheets, white-knuckled, as I slid my tongue over him, grazing slightly with my teeth. His groan was fire to my blood. Not one trustee responded to my email. The superintendent responded, the district will continue to follow its ongoing process of reviewing instructional materials in campus libraries. But she didn't. Instead, months later, I took a different mother addressing this on Facebook to get the attention of the candidate for the board. That candidate stated she communicated with you the very next morning. I was surprised for her to state that the superintendent claimed this was the first she heard of this and would take action. I wrote to you all months ago. In fact, here are copies of my emails asking for the board to follow the law, and you refused. I called and emailed the superintendent's office shortly after the board candidate stated she got immediate attention. While the candidate was able to get in touch right away, I am still waiting for her to return my call. Another parent provided me a copy of the review form that the district requires for challenging instructional resources. It asks that you read the entire resource and name something positive about it. Please enlighten me. What are some positives you took from what I just read? Why don't you read these books and tell me what resource of equal quality you would recommend for their place and why? Please take a hard look at yourself and ask why you're on this board. What is more important than keeping children safe from pornography and grooming? And don't claim as was done today, that these specific concerns were not brought to Lovejoy ISD's direct attention before, when you know that I've been emailing you about these concerns for months. Please, please do your job, beginning with following the law and responding to your constituents, not just the constituents who are running for school board. Thank you.
So we can go with the person who was tabled before
Yeah.
under Miss Campbell.
Yeah.
Hi, my name is Amy Campbell, and our home is at 2406 Forest Grove Estates Road. So thank you for allowing us to speak tonight, and thank you for tabling the discussion on the approval of bid awards for books and media. I just would like to challenge you as you review vendors and books that are in or may potentially be in our schools to also take a look at how supplemental materials are vetted for instruction. My son and his entire class were sent to a website in the 6th grade for research that in 2 clicks had them looking at pornographic material. And it was called religiostolerance.org. I was assured that this was a mistake and that the website would be banned from LISD. However, it reappeared again in 9th grade for a HUGAP assignment. So this is just an example of how the lack of proactive intervention can potentially hurt our students. It seems like it's an easier process to accept materials into our libraries and curriculum than it is to pull them out through the reconsideration process. And I would just like to encourage you to look for ways to reverse this process and make it more difficult for materials to make an approved list. And we should be vigilant about proactively protecting our children instead of making parents jump through hoops in a long and arduous review process. In an email that was sent out by the district that was already addressed this afternoon, we were informed that, quote, earlier this year, we were sent a list of library books that with the contention that they are not appropriate. We responded by sharing specific procedures and policies to follow to address the concern. Also in the email, we were told that it was in response to a post in a private Facebook group's concerns about obscene material, quote, immediately directed staff to review our library collections and determine if the books that were mentioned were part of our collection and in accordance with policy, initiate a review process if needed. I would like some clarification on the differences in responses to parental concerns. What was stated in the district email today seemed to contradict itself and show some level of favoritism to one concerned parent or group over another. And this doesn't help parents feel that they have an equal voice in the district, and it diminishes the level of transparency that you all have worked for and that we all hope for. So thank you for reviewing the policies and providing a fair process to everyone, and thank you for your care in protecting all of our children. On a separate note, as far as concerning the scholars, I know I could see the debate up here, and it seemed with great concern and care for these children, and I just wanted to say that hearing the pleas from these scholar families, I would just like to show support for our current families. We invited them here, and I would just like to encourage you all to keep in mind as you see how this process plays forward in the coming years, how we are mindful of these children that we invited into our district, and that we are showing them how we are living up to our own graduate profile by being fair and respectful of others, and being fair to these kids and being respectful to these kids, and how you consider the process moving forward for their acceptance and their tuition and everything. I can see that it was really hard decision to make tonight, and I appreciate your time and consideration for those kids. So thank you.
Cynthia Brugge.
Good evening, everyone. I have had some thoughts on my mind as a result of going to a lot of public meetings, hearing a lot of speakers when I was at Heritage Ranch the other night, I heard a speech from a Mr. Christian, I don't remember his first name, who wrote a book called Apostrophe. And the reason why I'm here is because he basically explained to us what we should all know, but I think we have forgotten because we grew up in this country. We didn't have to take a test. We didn't have to take a course. We didn't have to take an oath to be a citizen here. But our speaker did. And as I roam around in all these meetings and I meet people that earned their citizenship, it's made me very convicted that we have a whole generation that does not appreciate what it is to be free. We take it for granted. And we are losing freedom throughout this entire world. We are in dire straits throughout the world. And we need to protect our freedom and we need to appreciate it. And one thing I thought we should propose is to take the curriculum that people have to have in order for them to earn their freedom and make that our curriculum in our government classes so that our children can understand what it is to know their history, to know what it is to be an American, to be proud of being American, to understand what it means to take an oath, to protect our country, to love our country. You know, we think if they know the Pledge of Allegiance, that's enough. And we do the Pledge of Allegiance. But I'm telling you, I've had a rebirth in the last year of really understanding that being at these school boards and being a person who's campaigning for people, being a person like Julie and Nadu who are running for office, that these are freedoms that we have. And as a board, I would like for you guys to know how much I appreciate, and I think everybody in this room, how many hours you spend. And I don't take it for granted because I was on council and I know what you're doing because it's about twice what I did. And these two candidates that are in this audience deserve respect and they deserve impartiality by the board. They should be appreciated for their special talents and their voice. And I would just ask that all of us give them both an opportunity to be heard and to be evaluated based on what we need for our board to make it a full board that can serve us, the community. Thank you.
That it? Okay. Any further announcements? All right. With that will be adjourned.